It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org.
Show. It's a pleasure to be on the air with you. I'm Chris Boncha, joined by Jimmy Sullivan, and we have a new edition of One on One. Jimmy, how you doing? Holidays coming around the corner, and lots of sports to dig into. NBA. We have a little bit of football for you later, a little bit of baseball for you later. We got everything in this show, and we're on the air with you from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. How you doing this evening?
I'm doing great, Chris. Good to be with you, and I don't know how you feel about it. This week in sports was absolute madness. You had football obviously taking place this weekend. You had the Robinson Cano news with the Mets, and you had the NBA draft on Wednesday, free agency starting on Friday. It's hard to stuff a lot more into a sports week. A lot of off-the-field stuff going on. The Giants had a purported fight between two of their coaches, so that's something as well. A lot going on this week, Chris, and I can't wait to get into all of it with you. I feel like I kind of need to decompress just with all the stuff that happened this week, but this is about as good a place as any to do it, and I can't wait to do it with you.
Yeah, no, a good rundown there of the events of the week. We are going to dive into them. We'll give you a deep dive because we have 3 hours with you. Like I said, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. It's our new time slot and our venue, Jimmy and I, over Zoom here in the new era that we're living in. Look, you mentioned the NBA, and that certainly is our first hour. That is where we are starting because the NBA draft goes down on Wednesday. The Knicks land Obi Toppin, the Dayton product. This is a promising pick. It's drawing good reviews around the league, around the sport, but then there's questions. We're going to get into that. We have two NBA insiders who we talked to, and we'll air those interviews. Adam Zagoria, you can find him at the New York Times, Forbes. He's really a college basketball insider. The NBA side, someone we just talked to this morning, actually, and we apologize if anything breaks down during the day, but we talked to him this morning. It's Franklin Ncaa, and he's from Slam Online. So two NBA guys. We have them in the first hour, Jimmy, and you and I will also talk a little bit about what's going on with the Knicks, what's going on with the Nets, what's going on in the NBA, because certainly a lot swirling right now.
Yeah, and two great people to talk to, as you said, Chris, going in reverse order, I suppose. Franklin did a really good piece for Slam on Anthony Edwards, who's the number one pick in the NBA draft, and we talked to some Knicks there as well. Obi Toppin, yeah, you could say a local guy, spent a couple of years playing at Ossining, which is about 15 minutes away from the Knicks facility in Westchester. So give him the benefit of the doubt there. And then Adam Zagoria, who not only knows about a lot of the guys in the NBA draft, college basketball coming up this year, but also an expert on the Big East. And it was the last event that he basically got to cover before the shutdown was the Big East tournament that got prematurely canceled. And so we asked him about Miles Powell, who signed with the Knicks as an undrafted free agent. But yeah, a lot going on with the local teams. And that doesn't even really encompass free agency either. The Knicks have made, a minor move with Alec Burks. The Nets are bringing back Joe Harris on a big contract. So a lot to get into with both of the New York teams. But the Knicks, as you said, taking Obi Toppin. I think most people liked it. I know I liked it. We're both here at an Atlantic 10 school. We've seen Obi Toppin, so it was exciting to see that. He's coming home to the Garden, and can't wait to see how it goes. It's a really interesting pick that the Knicks were able to make at number 8.
Yeah, and we've seen him play at the Rose Hill Gym, and you've also seen him a highlight reel for sure. But then there's the age question about him. He's of advanced age for what you're looking at that level. Sorry, my microphone came out there. But look,
That's Zoom for you.
yeah, it happens. It's we roll with the punches here. It's funny. I was going to make a point earlier about you were saying what a packed show we have, and it definitely is something that we do every Saturday because we meet up to do one-on-one for 3 hours every Saturday, and it's in our title. It's a long tradition, New York's longest running sports call-in show, and every week it certainly feels like it's packed by the nature of we haven't spoken in a week. But this week it really feels packed because the NBA is buzzing where it hasn't been. It's been quiet. We haven't talked NBA in a while, but there's just so much going on in the league. I'm looking at Russell Westbrook, and now John Wall is looking like he's on the block. And of course, the big shoe to drop is going to be James Harden. And if he finds himself in a Brooklyn jersey, Jimmy, that you can't say enough about what that brings to this city. It's a true big three with KD and Kyrie Irving, and you've got to launch them to the top of your NBA title talks.
Absolutely. And I will say also, if James Harden gets traded, and assuming Kyrie Irving is not a part of that trade, I don't think he would be, the storylines just from that big three of Harden, Durant, Kyrie Irving would be incredible. Just that alone, I think, would be worth it, having those guys together. But in all seriousness, it's fascinating for the Nets because people are saying, well, do you mortgage the future? Do you, make some more minor moves? And we'll get into this with Andrew Posadas later. But you think about it from their point of view, and you only get so many chances at a championship. And you also only get so many chances at building a super team, if you will. Because this would be close to what the Miami Heat had with LeBron and Wade and Bosh. Now, one of the three, if the Nets were to pull this off, would have to make some sacrifices, and the likeliest choice is probably Kyrie Irving. But you think about it from their point of view, and I feel like if you get that opportunity and you don't have the rest of your team like completely pillaged, I think you go do it. I that's how I feel. I just think there's only so many cracks at that. The Nets window is now, if Kevin Durant is healthy and near where he was when he was with Golden State. I don't know if I almost think you have no choice but to see what you can do and try to go for it. So a lot of interesting stuff going on in the NBA, but the Nets have a real opportunity here to build a title contender. And I think, like you said, Chris, they are at or near the top of the East if they make this move for James Harden.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, you got to mortgage the future. But if you get the chance at James Harden, I don't know how you say no. And it certainly feels like he's going to be dealt. And I would say that the Nets right now look like the leader in that sweepstakes. But you don't really know, and we haven't heard much in a little bit. But later in the show, we bring you baseball and we bring you football. And Jimmy and I, Met fans, and it's an exciting time to be a Met fan. There's, for the Yankees, they've built what they've built, and I don't know that they do so much this offseason, although you never really know with Brian Cashman. But the Mets right now, they're all in. That is the indication, and you're smiling, I'm smiling. There is the Robinson Cano news this week, but I frankly think that it's actually a good piece of news for the Mets. They clear his $24 million, and he doesn't have to be around the team this year. At this point, he's a cheater. We'll get into it a little more later, but those are the two stories. It's Robinson Cano on one hand. The other hand is still Steve Cohen gets to assert his presence in the Mets system. Yeah, he's the owner. Not even I shouldn't even say front office, but Sandy Alderson leads the front office. He needs to get an executive. After he gets the executive, then the pocketbook is open for Sandy to spend, and that's an exciting thing.
Let me ask you, Chris, do you follow Steve Cohen on Twitter?
Yeah, I do.
You've been following what he's been up to. He is great. Like, he responds to the fans.
Yeah.
This is the exact opposite of what the Mets have been for the last 20 years. Like, Steve Cohen is all of us Mets fans in the way he interacts with fellow Mets fans, except he has $15 billion. And to be honest with you, I wish I was a little better at some of this graphic design stuff so I could mess around and put like Lindor and Bauer and Springer and all these guys in Mets jerseys, but it's just fun to dream. Like, if the Wilpons were in control of the Mets, right now. We're not having conversations about trading for and extending Francisco Lindor, going out, signing any of these free agents. Now we're sitting here like, hey, the Mets are players. And we've talked about the MLB market in general this offseason being what it is. But just to be able to, I mean, I got a pep in my step. I was reading the rundown this morning. I saw Mets, and then I saw the bullet points of all the players we're going to talk about, and like none of them are on the Mets, and they're all great players. And I'm like, wait, the Mets actually have a chance at maybe getting one or two of these guys. This is it's so exciting. Like, forgive me for going on here, but this is really fun. Like, this is. You get a second wind as a Mets fan sitting here thinking like, yeah, this team, could be pretty good over 162. Obviously, last year was very disappointing, but they go out, make the moves. They're going to have a new front office, hopefully soon. And yeah, this is like new life for Mets fans, basically. So I'm very excited. I don't know how you feel, but I'm really enjoying the Steve Cohen ownership so far.
I mean, you could guess how I feel. I'm on the same exact page. I feel like the kid on Christmas Eve, Christmas mornings tomorrow. I'm restless. I can't sleep because I'm just excited to see what's under the tree. Here's the thing. They're going to spend money. Sandy Alderson will be wise with the dollars he spends. Even the way that he is communicating publicly is completely different now than when he was running the team with the Wilpons in charge. At that point, he was muzzled. You knew that he just was hamstrung by a budget. The Wilpons said, look, this is the cash you have to spend. It's not like that anymore. Instead, he goes to Steve Cohen and says, I want to spend this cash. And Steve Cohen writes the check. And that's the story. And I agree with you. He's just outstanding on Twitter. Just outstanding. And finally, we'll go NFL with you in our final segment. If you stick with us till 2 a.m., we hope you do. I don't know if you're a late night drive or something, but keep us by the radio dial here on 90.7 FM. I should also mention we're on YouTube. Hit us with a comment, get involved, engage with us. Final thought, NFL, Jimmy, Jets and Giants. Here's the story. The Jets are tanking for Trevor. That's confirmed by now. I've said it a number of times. As long as Adam Gase is there, it's clear the team is trying to lose. The Giants, on the other hand, are all of a sudden poised, maybe even likely, to win this division. They might win this division with 5 or 6 wins.
Yeah, that's not a crazy thought at all.
Oh.
That last Jets Monday night game against New England, they were up 10. I think it was 10. Yeah, they were up 10 in the fourth quarter. Just a tanktastic performance in the fourth quarter by the Jets. Just unbelievable out of them. They wind up losing the game on a last-second field goal by Nick Folk, of all people. But that's beside the point. Jets are playing the Chargers tomorrow. Giants are on a bye. And unbelievably, I cannot believe I'm saying this. The Giants right now have the best quarterback in the NFC East. I realized that when they were playing the Eagles, and I'm taking Dak Prescott out of the conversation because he's hurt. But right now, 2020, Daniel Jones is the best quarterback in the NFC East. It's a low bar. I get it. But Daniel Jones is fulfilling it, at least in the last couple of games. Now, of course, Daniel Jones is incredibly inconsistent. We could be having an entirely different conversation once the Giants get back on the field next week. But yeah, like they could win the division, and you're looking at how it's going to shake out. Yeah, the difference, the Eagles might only win the division because of that tie they had in week 3. They might wind up at like 6-9-1 or something like that. Like that's how bad the NFC East is. And you're looking at the schedule, and the teams in the NFC East are going to be underdogs in a lot of the games. So yeah, it's just hard to contemplate, hard to think about. And the Jets, as you said, are the Jets. Hopefully, to be quite honest with you, we don't spend longer than we have to on that segment. But for the listeners in your cars on your late night drives, we just hope that New York football does not make you drive off the road. So that's really the biggest thing here.
I'll tell you what, on the other Giants, if you look at the other 8 teams in the NFC outside of the NFC East, they're all better than the 4 teams in that division. I mean, I would say any team in the NFC Central deserves, or the NFC West, with maybe the exception of the Niners, deserves a playoff spot over any of those 4 teams. But guess what? One of them is going to get it. One of them is going to host a playoff game this year. And if you're a Giant fan, you actually have a cause to be excited right now, because it very well could be you. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to start in our first hour with the NBA. We have Franklin Ncaa. We have Adam Zagoria first. But right after this break, Jimmy and I give you our takes before we go to the experts. We'll see you in 2 minutes. It's Jimmy Sullivan. I'm Chris Baccia. This is One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show.
Be sure to follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
With Jimmy Sullivan. First segment here, we promised that we dive right into the National Basketball Association, because everything is swirling right now. The draft went down Wednesday. Free agency opened last night at 6 p.m. And we're catching you here at about 11:17 in the evening and breaking down what we know, because we record in the morning here, and I can't lie to the listeners. Something may have happened in between. But where we are right now, Obi Toppin is really the story with the New York Knicks. If you're asking me, he's the number 8 overall pick. Let's start right there, Jimmy. Obi Toppin, the Dayton product, a lot of promise here. One of the best players in college basketball, maybe the best. He's 22 years of age. That's the conversation. But your perspective, I know you like the pick.
I definitely like the pick. And there had been a lot of chatter before the draft that the Knicks wanted him, but in order to get him, they might have to trade up to 5 or something like that. And they were sitting at 8. Yeah. And so they're sitting back at 8, and I'm watching the picks come in, and it's like, Obi might fall to them, because you had certain surprising selections, I would say, back into the top 5, back into the top 10. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, Obi Toppin's going to fall to the Knicks. And once he did, I was like, yeah, this is a great pick. Yes, as you said, he's 22 years old. And we got into this with Franklin Ncaa, where a lot of teams in the draft, particularly at the top end, are drafting on upside. So they're more likely to take 19, 20, 21-year-olds, guys like that. And the Knicks sat back and had the best player in college basketball last year, and that's what Obi Toppin was, fall back to them with the number 8 pick. I think it's a good pick. I think he'll be able to help out right away. He's a decent shooter. He's got a lot of Amari Stoudemire in his game, and Knicks fans remember Amari Stoudemire. First year he was in New York, he was outstanding, and then the injuries started to pile up. But this is a guy who I wouldn't say he's going to be a franchise-altering player, but he's definitely part of the solution. And I think it's a really good pick at number 8 for the Knicks, and you have to kind of build around that. But overall, not just Obi Toppin. I thought Leon Rose for his first draft, Obi Toppin, Emmanuel Quickly from Kentucky, which we'll get into. I thought he did a nice job. I thought, this is a guy who knows basketball. He made a couple really good picks, I thought, and Obi Toppin's going to be able to help out this team right away. I think he could be in contention for a starting spot. I think he'll definitely contribute off the bat if he's not. And I like the pick. I just think it's a really solid choice for the Knicks. And once he fell to 8, to me, that almost feels like a no-brainer.
Yeah, when he drops, especially the thought that you got to trade up. If they traded up for him, I would have been a critic. But it's funny. Andrew Posadas in the Zoom chat giving us nods. I could tell he likes the pick, and we're going to talk to him a little later. But I'm getting the idea, and he's nodding now, that he likes this pick. Obi Toppin falls to number 8, and what he did in college. I mean, it's hard to deny. I have to bring up the age question here, though, and you said it well, Jimmy. Is he franchise altering? Is he a contributor? Absolutely. Can he join right away and make an impact? Yes, but does he alter the franchise? And I've got to ask this question of a number 8 overall pick. He's got to alter the franchise, and if he's not, then then there's some downside there. And I might extend from the lottery. They say the lottery. I want a 19-year-old kid who is gonna grow. 22-year-old might be at his peak. That might be the case for Obi Toppin. At number 8, I'm also in the world of wanting a young kid like that who can come in and grow the way RJ Barrett will. That's the expectation. I'm wondering if the Knicks missed a chance there. Again, hard to criticize the pick at number 8 for Obi Toppin. It just feels right. But there's certainly that question, there's definitely that question of age right now.
Yeah, and those questions, everything you just said, very valid. My counter to that will be this. The NBA draft last year, the Knicks were right at the end. You wanted to be in the top 3 of the NBA draft last year. So they went to 3. And they got RJ Barrett. It was the guy that they had wanted once they wound up getting that pick in the lottery. This year's draft, wide open. There isn't a lot of guys, if there is really anybody who, is at that level. Because, you looked at, last year's draft, and we were going into it and just talking about, Zion's incredible, and John Morant and RJ Barrett. And there were, game-changing players at the top of that draft. Is Anthony Edwards a game changer for the Timberwolves at number 1? I don't know if he is. Is, any of these other guys who were taken, in the top 10, is James Wiseman a game changer for Golden State? I don't know. He's a big guy. The game's going away from that. Could LaMelo be a game changer? If I was to make a big board, I might put LaMelo at 1. That's beside the point. Point being is that there aren't a lot of those guys in this year's NBA draft. Reminded me a little bit of 2013. That year's draft just wasn't that good. And then middle of the first round, the Bucks take Giannis. One of these guys is going to be a great player. We just don't know who, and it's not obvious who that's going to be, at least right now. So I think what the Knicks did is probably about the best you can do, which is sit back, let the game come to you, see who's available, take the best player. I think the Knicks did that, and you're right, Chris, in saying that, trading up and giving up maybe that back half of the first round pick that they had would have been a mistake. Yeah, probably. But you know what? The best business move is just kind of sit back and say, okay, we're at 8. It's not a great draft. Let's see who falls to us. And I think Obi Toppin falling to them, probably about the best case scenario. So I think the Knicks have to be very happy with the way things turned out, that they were able to get a guy like this, who I think could be a real difference maker for the Knicks pretty much right away.
Yeah. And again, around the league, if you're paying attention to the chatter, the pick is drawing rave reviews. It feels like the right pick. We should also mention Emmanuel quickly at the end of the first round. Miles Powell, the undrafted free agent, also drawing good reviews. And these are guys that we talk about with our guests down the road. I got this question about Leon Rose, the team president, his first draft here. I have a little bit of fear because of my experience with Brody Van Wagenen in the Mets. I don't know about an agent as team president. I look at the Nets and Sean Marks, and that's somebody who's got it figured out and who I think is running an excellent ship over there. Leon Rose, you can relate. I just have that ounce of uncertainty about an agent running basketball operations.
Yeah, agent running the ship, meddling owners. I think we've both heard that one before.
Yeah.
This case is kind of different because we've seen agents go to the other side, if you will, in basketball, and it's worked out. I mean, we've seen Bob Myers do it, Rob Pelinka with the Lakers. We've seen guys be successful. I think part of that is because basketball going out and getting guys and drafting guys, and we've even seen this with what the Knicks have done. It's so heavy on relationships. And, Leon Rose's draft picks, I think at least Obi Toppin was CAA. I think Quickly might be a CAA guy as well. Miles Powell is a CAA guy. List goes on and on. And we made those jokes about the Mets too. Jed Lowry is a CAA guy as well. But you look at the Knicks front office, and it's a lot easier to have an agent who is inexperienced with running basketball operations, because frankly, you compare that to baseball, there's so much less to run in basketball. Like baseball, you've got to have the roster, you've got a farm system, you've got all these things to think about on a daily basis. Basketball, not to say that job's easy, it's not, but there's less stuff, I think, to think about. You've got your roster, you've got your G League, you've got your draft picks, you've got the salary cap. Those are kind of the main things. And
right.
If you surround yourself with smart people in those areas, you should be okay. And I think Leon Rose, what I've kind of ascertained from the moves that he's made so far, he knows basketball. Like, he seems like a smart basketball guy. And, he obviously has relationships with certain players. People have talked about player X going to the Knicks for years, whether it was Durant or Giannis in next year's free agency potentially. I think it's less about that, and I think it has to be more about just making smart decisions. So far, he's made pretty smart decisions. The thing I'm more worried about, honestly, at this point, is not Leon Rose. It's the ownership. Like, are they going to get involved and drop a bomb and say, you got to go sign this guy? I think that's totally the wrong way to go. And the only time that ownership for the Knicks really has let president of basketball operations run things was when Phil Jackson was there, and we know how that turned out. So I think if they let Leon Rose kind of just do his thing here, I honestly think things are going to turn out pretty good for the Knicks just based on what I've seen out of him so far.
I hope you're right. I really do. But here we are, and the Knicks are going to be bad again this year. But we know this. We say it year in and year out. They're going to be drafting probably toward the top again. And I agree with you that number 8 almost was a good setup for them, where Obi Toppin fell to them. It just wasn't the draft class. Next year maybe is. Next year the money frees up. Kawhi is a free agent. Giannis. These feel like pipe dreams with the Knicks team. You've got to show some growth if you're going to go out and get somebody like that. You can't advertise Madison Square Garden right now the way it is. But does this team grow? Does this team show steps this year? I'm not certain that they will.
Yeah, it's interesting because with Tom Thibodeau running things too, I think if nothing else, I think they're going to be more competitive, because that's the type of coach Tom Thibodeau is. Is he the guy to get the Knicks closer to the finish line, relatively speaking? That's what I'm really skeptical of. But I think he'll be good for a lot of the young guys. And the bigger problem for the Knicks is that you look at the talent on their roster, like you have a guy like Julius Randle playing way out of his depth, pretty much, and not his fault. He's a stretch guy. He's maybe a stretch 5. Maybe he's better suited coming off the bench on a good team, honestly. And here he is as the number one option on the Knicks. But you've got a guy in Mitchell Robinson who could be an interesting big man. Although again, I vaguely touched on this before. Yeah, the game's very much going away from that type of guy. So he's got to expand his range, and we've seen him in the gym, messing around with some deep balls. So, maybe that becomes another asset in his game. Who knows? But you look at this team, Obi Toppin steps in. I think he's going to start, probably. I mean, if he doesn't, he's going to be the sixth man because the Knicks just obviously are not very good right now. So I think what you're looking for is growth. And at the end of the day, you made the point, Chris. The Knicks are not going to get anywhere with this roster. Just not going to. That's just the fact of the matter. They need to go out and sign a star. You have to see what Obi turns out to be. And you take next year to do that. It'll be a weird year next year, but I think it's a lot better than what this past year was in terms of figuring out things from a developmental side. But you go into the summer of 21 with the free agents you mentioned. You go get one of them, and all of a sudden you're probably looking at the Knicks as a playoff team because the East is what the East is at this point. So I think the Knicks are not in as bad of a shape as maybe we're figuring here. I think Emmanuel quickly, honestly, this might be a little bit of a bold take on my part. I think he's going to compete for playing time off the jump with the way he shoots. The Knicks don't have a lot of that right now, so I think he could be helpful in that regard. But you've got a team that I think will be competitive next year. Do I think they're a playoff team? I honestly don't think that's the most ridiculous thing to think they could make the playoffs in the East just because the East is so bad. I mean, the Orlando Magic made the playoffs this year. They're not very good. So the Knicks aren't like that far off from being a playoff team. But the biggest thing, as you said, Chris, growth, development, seeing what you have in the guys you have now, who to keep around, who to let go. And I think those are the biggest decisions the Knicks will make probably in the next year or so.
I think you're an optimist, and I think that's good. I think you're buying into this draft class. Then there's the free agency question, because this team could go make a move in free agency. Even Russell Westbrook, a trade there. You didn't draft a guard. Is that a potential fit? I think that's a good question. What does this team do in free agency? Is it Van Fleet? Is it can they get Gordon Hayward? He looks like he's headed to the Pacers, but do they make one ad here?
Yeah, I mean they added Alec Burks last night.
Right.
That's a more minor move, but he can score, so he can help them. It's interesting. Westbrook's a guy I'd stay away from. He's 32, 33 years old. A lot of money left on the contract. Guys like him don't tend to age well. He's not a great shooter. He's not terribly efficient. He's frankly a very bad fit in Houston next to James Harden. Just doesn't work. So I would stay away from Russ. Hayward is intriguing because if you look at like the arc of Gordon Hayward's career, 10 years ago, he's in college. His last shot as a college basketball player is a 60-footer that almost goes in to win the national championship for Butler. And then he starts his career in Utah. He's a great player on a average to decent team, gets to Boston, and like the first 5 minutes of his time as a Boston Celtic has the catastrophic injury. Yeah. And, he's never been the same since, and he's probably not a fit in Boston anymore. I'm just curious if the Knicks sign him, like, what are you asking of him at that point? Because this guy's been so banged up over the past few years. And, the money that he's asking for is still like a lot for how much he's actually contributed over the last few years. And part of that was, not having that year in 2017 and 18 and having like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum's become a star, and Jaylen Brown basically took over the role that Gordon Hayward probably would have had. So I don't know how keen I am on that, but I'm also aware that like he could definitely help these young players. It's just a matter of, are you willing to give him 4 years? I think sometimes you have to give to get. So I think Gordon Hayward's a really interesting proposition for the Knicks. I think he would be a good guy to have around. But if you're asking him to be like, if you're asking him to drop 20 points a game and be consistently healthy, now you're approaching territory where maybe you're asking for a little too much. But I think he's the most intriguing guy for the Knicks. So if I were them, that's who I'd look at first. Westbrook, I would just stay away from, because at that point you're probably just stunting the growth of Frank Ntilikina and RJ Barrett if you want to give them a look and see if both of those guys are worth keeping around. Barrett, I think they'll invest more in. Ntilikina is a question mark. Knicks fans feel very passionately about that guy one way or the other.
And we'll have more on Hayward and the potential destinations for some of the big free agents when we talk to Andrew Posadas later in headlines. Let's hit on Brooklyn quickly here. Joe Harris re-ups 4 years, $75 million. This was a big priority for Brooklyn. We mentioned it, the open, we teased it a little bit. Is this team in it for Harden? I think they absolutely are. I think they may well get him, and that opens up everything. I mean, that puts, they're already a contender right now for a title, and at that point, it just seals the deal. They get Landry Shamet. They don't have any draft picks for us to talk about, so there's not as much there, but they are certainly players in free agency, or at least on the trade market. If it's James Harden, it becomes a lot of pressure on that team to bring home a title. Yeah,
there is. And I think the wild card in this is that if they don't get James Harden, then it becomes about KD and Kyrie, obviously. And we've never seen them play together.
Yep. And
Kyrie Irving didn't play a lot last year. Joe Harris is a really good re-sign. He's one of the best shooters in the league. If you do get James Harden, then Joe Harris has a more limited role, but it's a role he's really good at, which is getting open, shooting, perimeter defense on the other end. So I think the Nets are in a really interesting spot. I think they could be like a top 4, top 5 team in the East as is. Adding James Harden obviously changes the calculus considerably. But, the wild card here is still, we don't know how good KD is going to be. Kyrie Irving did not demonstrate an ability to stay healthy last year. And we'll just have to see. There's still a lot of question marks with the Nets. Like, as good as this team can be, there's still a lot of questions that I think won't be answered until the ball goes in the air on December 22nd.
So that's it on basketball. Knicks, Nets, NBA draft finished up Wednesday. Free agency in full thrust right now. And on the other side of this break, we have Adam Zagoria. He is a college basketball expert. Get a little perspective from him on some of these picks. Take a deep dive into Obi Toppin, what he thinks. Miles Powell, he broke that news of the Knicks signed the Seton Hall product. So we have that for you on the other side of this break. Stick with us. It is 11:38 in the evening, and we'll take you all the way through 2 a.m. We'll see you after the break.
Check out all of our latest podcasts on WFUVSports.org or wherever you get your shows, including NFL Friday, Nosebleeds, Pick and Pod, 5 on 3, College Gridiron, and FUV FC. Also, our newest edition, Off the Air, diving into the station's legacy with its most prominent alumni. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Longest running sports call-in show. We're joined by Adam Zagoria.
Adam runs his own blog, Zag's blog. He's freelance at the New York Times, Forbes Sports, and NewJersey.com. First of all, thanks for joining us. How are you today, Adam?
I'm doing great, fellas. I'm enjoying the 60-degree weather in New York City today.
Yes, it is a nice day in New York City. The sun is out. And we're on the air in the evening on Saturday, of course. It's a pre-record. But let's start with the NBA draft. And the first thing that I want to hit on is Miles Powell. You broke this news of his signing. He goes to the Knicks. First question is, how surprised are you that he isn't drafted? And the obvious follow-up, how does he fit with the New York Knicks?
Yeah, I mean, look, getting drafted is a great thing on draft night for a player and his family. But, you know, I wrote a couple stories on NJ.com and elsewhere before that about, you know, there's almost an advantage in some ways, you know, if you're of not getting drafted, you know, assuming you're not a lottery pick or a first round pick, because then you're a free agent and you can kind of pick your future destination. You know, it's a little surprising. Miles and also Marcus Howard from Marquette, you know, both first-team All-Americans from the Big East. Neither one was drafted. You know, I asked Jay Wright about it yesterday, the Villanova coach, on a Zoom call, and he made the point that, look, the NBA draft is about drafting on potential and upside, and they're, you know, in love with really young guys and one-and-dones and guys who could make an impact later on. And they're not really necessarily drafting later on for, you know, guys who can help the roster immediately. So that was kind of the case with Miles and Marcus Howard. And, you know, they both end up with teams. You know, as far as how he's going to fit in, look, he's got a connection to the CAA guys, and he trained with Obi Toppin for the last 6 months in South Jersey with Rick Brunson, who's a CAA guy, just like Leon Rose and Worldwide West. So I think it helps that, you know, he's been working out against Obi and with Obi. Obviously, the Knicks took Obi with the number 8 pick. And, you know, Miles Powell is a scorer and a shooter. I mean, you know, I covered him at Seton Hall. He's a tough-as-nails kid. He's from Trenton. It's a great local story, just like Obi's from Brooklyn and went to Ossining High School. You know, Miles' three-point percentage was down last year to about 31%. He did have a concussion. He dealt with some injuries last year. The year before that, 36% from deep and a sophomore. So, you know, he was also facing a lot of double, triple teams last year. So, he'll have a chance, hopefully, with the Knicks.
Adam, I wanted to ask, you were talking about how NBA teams, rather, I should say, are drafting towards potential, towards what you can do in the future. Miles Powell, obviously, is one of the older guys in the NBA draft, and he has a lot more college experience than most of the guys who are drafted. How ready do you think he is for the NBA game, particularly compared to some of these other guys who we saw go off the board on Wednesday night because of all the experience he had and, frankly, the huge numbers that he was able to put up at Seton Hall?
Yeah, I mean, look, in terms of the draft, let's call it what it is. He's 23 years old. You know, he's not a 18, 19-year-old, you know, phenom, McDonald's All-American, one and done. He's 23. He's really only about, you know, I'm 5'11", and I kind of look eye to eye with him when I'm talking to him. You know, so maybe he's 6'1", you know, they list him at 6'2". So, you know, he's not 6'5", and he's not 19 years old. You know, that said, just like with Obi's was the National Player of the Year. You know what you're getting. You're getting a guy who, you know, is athletic, can score, is a little older, proved he could win and compete at the college level. And the same thing with Miles. He got his team to the NCAA tournament a couple of years. Seton Hall, let's not forget, I think would have been in the mix to make the Final Four last year of the NCAA tournament if there had been one. I mean, you talk to all the, you know, the Jay Billises and the Fran Fraschillas of the world. They thought Seton Hall had a chance to make the Final Four. They had a very deep and balanced team. Besides for Miles, they had a great coach. And it's sad, you know, I covered the team, and, you know, it was sad for a lot of those guys that they didn't get to play in the tournament. And who knows, maybe they make a Final Four and his draft stock goes up at that point. So, you know, like a lot of guys, he's going to get a chance in training camp to show what he's got. The Knicks, I think, only have, 7 guys signed for next season. So, it's a good situation where, you know, they're going to need guys to space the floor and shoot it. And that's what he does. And he's going to have to make the most of his time in training camp. I mean, you know, what's crazy about this year is normally these guys would have a summer league and, a fall training camp a couple months after the draft to get ready. You know, these dudes were drafted on Wednesday and, you know, training camp starts in 10 days, a week. And then the season starts in late December. So, you know, he's got an opportunity. He's going to have to make the most of it.
We're talking to Adam Zagoria, the college basketball insider for us. And I want to ask you about Obi Toppin, the number 8 pick, the Dayton product, goes to the New York Knicks. A lot of excitement about this pick. Some critics, of course, but there was some idea that the Knicks might have to trade up to go get Obi Toppin. He falls to number 8. Is this a victory for the Knicks? What's your thought on Obi Toppin playing in Madison Square Garden?
Yeah, look, I think it's great. I mean, it's great that he fell. I think a lot of people are surprised. Obviously, he was a projected top 5 pick. You know, Tyrese Halliburton was also there, right, when they picked, if I'm not mistaken. So they had options. You know, in so many drafts in the past, it's like, oh, they didn't pick Steph Curry, or they just missed on that guy by 1 pick, or they just missed on this guy by 1 pick. You know, I did a story yesterday on Forbes quoting Kendrick Perkins, who said the Knicks, you know, finally did something right here. And I think you got to give them credit. I mean, look, this guy was the National Player of the Year. He won the Wooden Award and the Naismith Award. And instead of, you know, reaching for a project or a young guy, you take the guy who you've seen, you know, dominate college basketball. He led Division I in dunks at 107 dunks last year. You know, he can shoot it. I think he can stretch the floor a little more than he's shown. He can get out in transition. He's going to be a highlight reel in transition. And, you know, plus he's a local kid, Brooklyn, Ossining. I mean, what's not to love about that? He seemed overwhelmed by emotions. You know, when he was drafted, his father's kind of a street ball legend in New York City. So, you know, the Knicks under Leon Rose and Worldwide West, you know, hopefully are turning the corner and making some good decisions.
Adam, staying on the subject of Obi Toppin, one comparison I've seen in several circles is a lot of people have said that there is a lot of Amari Stoudemire in his game. And Knicks fans obviously remember that prime Amari Stoudemire, you know, when he was in Phoenix and maybe it's the first year or two with the Knicks, really, really good player. Do you think that going into the NBA, Obi Toppin could be that level of player and production for the Knicks at some point here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough to ask. You know, very few guys go into the NBA and light it up their rookie year or make an impact, you know, right away. I mean, guys like LeBron and Kobe and KG, these guys are, you know, generational talents who, you know, they went straight from high school. They were physically able to make the transformation. You know, I think Zion Williamson, you know, probably could have gone out of high school. You know, he had some injury issues, but, you know, he was a lot of fun to watch when he played last year for the Pelicans. And, you know, these guys are all younger. Obi's obviously a little older. You know, this is a kid who didn't have a single Division I scholarship, you know, at Ossining High School, which is pretty amazing, and ends up going to, you know, Mount Zion Prep. But, you know, to answer your question, I think he's going to be, again, a lot of fun. I mean, he knows how to dunk it. He's got a lot of dunks. If whoever the point guards are for the Knicks, you know, get him the ball in transition, you know, he's going to put on a show. It's obviously a little weird. There probably won't be fans at the Garden. So, you know, he won't get that crowd excitement and buzz when he throws down a dunk. You'll have to watch it on the MSG network or whatever. But, you know, it obviously depends on what other pieces they put around him. But I think it's a great pick.
I want to switch gears to the Ncaa and what it's going to have to face in the pandemic. And we've seen professional sports leagues find a way to have a season. And of course, March is not so far away at this point. Your thoughts on the state of college basketball as it tries to find a way to produce a season for fans? We've seen shutdowns really across the country. What's your thought on college basketball in light of the pandemic?
Yeah, it's crazy, man. I mean, I've written a ton of stories on this too. I mean, if you look at just the Big East Conference, there are 11 teams in the Big East. 7 of them have already had to pause due to COVID, and we haven't even started the season yet. You know, Seton Hall is on a pause right now. UConn just came out of a quarantine. DePaul and Creighton in the Big East just announced positive tests in the last couple days. So that's, 7 out of 11 teams in the Big East have had to pause. The NCAA made this rule that you have to play 13 games to qualify for the NCAA tournament. So I was on a Zoom with Jay Wright yesterday. He was saying teams are just going to, breathe a sigh of relief when they get to 13 games, right? I mean, because if you get to 13, then you can qualify.
Right.
I mean, everybody's scheduled to play 27, 25 games or whatever. So you would think getting to 13 is not that hard. But I was just throwing out on another interview today, like, let's just say hypothetically, the top 3 teams are Gonzaga, Baylor, Villanova. Let's say these teams get multiple, COVID tests and they end up only playing 11, 12 games, right? Let's say they go 11-0, 12-0, 10-2, whatever, and they don't qualify for the tournament because they haven't played 13 games. I mean, that's unlikely. That's a worst case scenario, but that seems, it's possible. So, look, there's going to be bubbles. I mean, they're doing this Mohegan Sun Bubbleville starting next week with a lot of great games. Baylor and Villanova are there. A bunch of teams are going to be there. It wouldn't surprise me if the Big East tournament ends up in a bubble somewhere, maybe in Mohegan Sun. And then we saw this week the NCAA tournament came out and said they're going to have a bubble, possibly in Indianapolis. So obviously the bubbles worked with the NBA, the WNBA, and hopefully it works so we can have a college basketball season.
Adam, a two-parter here. I wanted to ask because I read a while back that you had COVID in, I think, late March or early April, if memory serves. Just wanted to ask, how are you feeling now on the other side of that now for a few months?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, I got it early, and it was, I was at the Big East tournament that, first of all, I went to a concert at the Garden. I don't know if you guys are old enough to know who the Allman Brothers were.
Yeah.
But I saw an Allman Brothers tribute concert that Tuesday night, March 10th at the Garden. There were 18,000 people there. I tweeted some pictures of it. People were kind of making fun of me on Twitter and like, Zags is going to get COVID. And then the next day I was at the first day of the Big East tournament. They were giving out the awards. I was standing next to Jay Wright, Miles Powell, Kevin Willard. We didn't really know anything at that point. And then I came home that Wednesday night, as you guys recall, and the NBA announced they were canceling their season or postponing their season. And I think at that point, everybody was like, wow, this is real. This is happening. And, then the next Thursday, that following day, they canceled the Big East tournament, in the middle of the St. John's Creighton game. And then, long story short, about a week later, I started to get, really bad cough and headaches. And, I tested early and turned out I had it. And, it was a rough couple of weeks. I had a fever and the cough was really bad. And then within a couple of weeks, it was gone. I had antibodies over the summer. So, I'm not, luckily I've sort of been through it already. I'm not really walking around like everyone else paranoid about getting it. I mean, hopefully I don't get it again, but it's a very serious situation, and depending, it affects people differently. And obviously it affects older people and people with pre-existing conditions seriously. So, everybody's got to mask up and social distance and all that.
Cool. And that's obviously great to hear. But the second part of this, I wanted to go back to kind of what you were talking about, is that we are probably going to be dealing with COVID throughout the scheduled college basketball season. I think it's one thing for out-of-conference games to be affected, which we've already seen. But as we get into January and these conference seasons begin, how concerned are you about what you had said before, that a really good team could have a bunch of games wiped out, whether it's their outbreak or somebody else's, and maybe they only get to play a handful of games? How big of a concern is that for you, for college basketball? What's your thought on that as we sit here?
I think it's a big concern. I mean, look, I talk to coaches all the time. I'm on Zoom calls all the time. I asked John Calipari on a Zoom call a week ago, if you guys have a positive test, will you shut down for 14 days? He said yes. I talked to Rick Pitino the other day. He tweeted, and I talked to him on the phone. He's advocating for May Madness. I talked to him on the phone. He said start the season in late March or April with league play, and then have May Madness with the NCAA tournament in May. So this is something all the coaches are talking about. It's obviously, like we said, 7 of 11, Big East teams have already been hit. The NCAA tournament is not going to happen in May. It's going to happen in March and April. They lost $375 million last year by not having a tournament. So everyone's saying you have to have one this year because, there's a lot of money at stake. But I just don't think we know how the season's all is gonna play out. I mean, Iona with Coach Pitino has already had to cancel 4 games to start their season. They were supposed to start November 25th at Fordham, which would have been the start of the Rick Pitino era at Iona. They're not going to start now until December 3rd. So that's 8 days later. They're still in a pause. And then the other thing, guys, is, the injury situation here. Like, Seton Hall is shut down now. Then they're going to, let's say they come out of their quarantine on the 25th, which I think is Wednesday. The guys haven't played or practiced in 2 weeks. Then they're going to go fly to Kentucky, play a game against Louisville, 27th, and then play Baylor, the number 2 team in the country, on the 29th, after their guys haven't practiced for 2 weeks. I mean, you're just kind of asking, I think, for injuries. And, Danny Hurley at UConn was saying he's got guys coming back from injury, and that pause interrupts their progress and can, contribute to re-injury. So I think there's going to be a lot of unforeseen consequences.
Final question for you, Adam. You mentioned Rick Pitino and Iona. I just want to zoom in on that a little bit. Super curious topic for me. And I'd love to know your perspective on, besides COVID and how that might derail things, your thoughts on the Rick Pitino era in Iona. Of course, he was supposed to start here just down the road from me at the Rose Hill Gym, but that won't be happening. But in any case, Rick Pitino and Iona, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, we could talk about Rick Pitino for days. I've known him and covered him for, a long time now. Look, the bottom line is the guy's a Hall of Fame coach. He took 3 teams to the Final Four, 3 schools. He's won championships at 2. He's the only coach to win an NCAA championship at 2 schools, Louisville and Kentucky. Obviously, he's had his, missteps and has been in the news for, a number of situations in recent years. He maintains his innocence. He hasn't been really directly tied to at least 2 of the 3, strikes on his record. And for Iona to be able to land him after losing a guy like Tim Cluess, who was a great coach in and of, his own career, that's great for Iona. Rick's a New York guy. He's from here. I know he's very happy to be back at Iona. He says it reminds him of Providence, where he started his career. It's a small school. He can familiarize himself with them. What's different there, obviously, is that the MAC is a 1-bid league, right? I mean, he was in the Big East and other major conferences where 4, 5, 6 teams go to the tournament every year. At Iona, just like with Tim Cluess, you pretty much have to win the MAC tournament to go to the NCAA tournament. So, this is his first year. It was also funny. He said they got 8 new guys this year, and they were able to get a lot of them because of COVID, because a lot of these kids couldn't visit campuses, right? So they committed on the name Pitino, and if they were able to visit and go to other schools, they might not have committed. So he kind of joked about that. But, I think it's great for Iona and great for the MAC, and it'll be interesting to see again with the 1-bid league how that works out.
Adam Zagoria giving us college basketball insight. You can find him at Zag's blog, the New York Times, Forbes Sports, NewJersey.com. We thank you so much for joining us. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks,
Sure.
Adam.
Fellas, stay safe. Have a good Thanksgiving.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org.
Andrew, how you doing? It's now 12 o'clock and it's now the morning. It is now the morning.
Yeah, we're crossing the midnight hour. And Chris, you know what? Truthfully, I think people would rather listen to you. Your voice is incredibly beautiful and it's aesthetically pleasing to listen to. I don't think anyone wants to listen to my raspy, nasally voice. But again, I am here with some headlines. And guys, you spent a majority of the first hour in the association. Let's stay there because obviously the big news right now, NBA free agency for the upcoming season, which starts December 22nd, the 22nd of December, NBA free agency started on Friday evening. And some notable things so far before the moratorium ends on Sunday and players are officially allowed to sign with their teams. Some things of note, guys. Montrezl Harrell is staying in Los Angeles, but he's going to sign with the defending champion Los Angeles Lakers, 2-year, $19 million, and that's already after the Lakers had signed Wesley Matthews to a 1-year, $3.6 million deal. Danilo Gallinari is heading to the ATL. He's going to join the Hawks on a 3-year, $62 million deal. Our producer, Alex Walls, will be happy to know that Goran Dragic is going to re-sign with the Miami Heat on a 2-year deal. Also re-signed Myers Leonard. As Chris mentioned earlier, Joe Harris staying with Brooklyn on a 4-year, $75 million deal. The Wizards re-signed Davis Bertans. How about shooters in this free agency? Davis Bertans, 5 years, $80 million. And for the Detroit Pistons, they give Jeremy Grant $60 million after a solid postseason performance in the bubble. They also signed Mason Plumlee to a 3-year, $25 million deal, leaving their talented young big man, Christian Wood, to go to Houston on a 3-year, $41 million deal. A lot of things happening, a lot of things opening. We've heard about Gordon Hayward potentially going to Indiana. The Knicks want him as well. Still a lot of moves left to be done in the next couple of days. Jimmy, I'll come to you first. What are you liking so far? What are you not liking so far in free agency?
I'll start on a positive note. I like what the Lakers are doing. I mean, they get Montrezl Harrell. Is it weird for me to think that with the moves they made, in a way, they're almost better? Like, they shipped off Danny Green, and Dwight Howard had the about face last night where he tweeted that he was going back to LA, deleted it, and then like 15 minutes later, it comes out that he's going to the 76ers. But you've got a younger rim protector type in Harrell. You've got a guy in Wes Matthews who will fill Danny Green's role for less money. This is really good for the Los Angeles Lakers. I don't know if they could have done a lot better than what they've done in the first hours of free agency. So really impressed by LA, and it's about as good as they could have hoped for. It's going to be tough for them in the West next year, defending their championship, but they're getting really good pieces to surround LeBron, and they want to extend Anthony Davis. It seems like that's going to get done. And hats off to them. Hats off to Rob Pelinka and that front office. I think they're doing a really good job so far in free agency.
The tampering thing is really what I'm looking at in free agency, and I know you're going to get into this, Andrew. So I'll tee you up with Bogdanovich, but I don't really understand how a deal is struck at the exact hour that free agency opens, and I'm supposed to believe that there aren't conversations, there aren't murmurs before free agency opens. I don't know how that works, and I'll let you dive into the headline there.
Yeah, and Bogdanovich, I mean, one of the more coveted restricted free agents going into this. Most people have known that he does not want to be in Sacramento anymore. And after midnight a few days ago, after the Drew Holiday deal to Milwaukee had been announced, there were links with Bogdanovich to the Milwaukee Bucks. However, we saw yesterday that the Bucks and the Kings are moving forward with Bogdanovich looking elsewhere to find other suitors, other options throughout the league after he did not want to sign with the Bucks. And that's the thing. When you have a sign and trade, essentially the player that's being traded needs to sign on the dotted line. And apparently Bogdanovich didn't feel like that was the deal for him in Milwaukee, thinks he can get more money elsewhere. And it's what you mentioned, Chris. It's hard for me to believe that tampering isn't just rampant throughout every offseason when we're getting these deals leaked out hours or and sometimes days before free agency or these periods of times officially begin. So now if you're the Kings, you may get another deal that might be better, or you might get a deal that might be worse. Now, they wanted to trade with Milwaukee, and for all intents and purposes, Bogdanovich wanted to be in Milwaukee. But Jimmy, Bogdanovich knows that he's seeing other guys get money, and he wants to cash out too. And I think that's what ultimately prompted this deal to fall off.
No coffee for the Bucks. Coffee is for closers. That being said, it's interesting. I was thinking about it. When you make a sign and trade like that from the Bucks' point of view, you kind of have to know that the guy you're getting wants to be there. That's very important. And yeah, the Kings are basically assigning Bogdanovich to the Bucks. And I thought about it like we all got assigned at some point or other to this show, but we all want to be here. So, and Emmanuel, our sports manager, Bobby, our sports director, they know that. That's why they put us on these assignments, because we want to be here. And that's the type of thing that before you make a deal like that, you should probably be sure of. I think the Bucks are having a good offseason. I mean, I don't think people realize how good Drew Holiday is and how much better he's going to complement Giannis than Eric Bledsoe and George Hill. But, I mean, this Bogdanovich thing, as you said, Andrew, it's so weird, and he could have really helped the Bucks. This is a blow, not getting him. And, maybe they'll get somebody comparable to that. But, yeah, it hurts. I don't think you can get around that for the Bucks. And, it's a team that's had the best record in the NBA the last 2 years and got bounced in the playoffs rather unceremoniously both times. So they come into the season trying to avenge that, and you're trying to fit things around Giannis, and they've made some big moves that I think, would have been really good in the Bogdanovich case, were really good in the Drew Holiday case. But, when you do these things, you got to know. And they skip that part of it. So that's what I don't understand about this story.
And Bogdanovich maybe becomes a Laker is a report that I've seen now, and talk about having a good offseason. The Los Angeles Lakers, they had him, and you know what? The story reminds me, when I think about the tampering thing, there's a great story of Rex Ryan, the Jet head coach, when he was going to get Bart Scott, and he came to the Jets, Ryan, and just, he was a larger than life guy, and he was going to make moves. And there's a story of him drove his car to Bart Scott's house in the pitch black, and as soon as it hit midnight, got out of the car, rang the doorbell, got Bart Scott fired up, and they banged out a deal right there at his dining room table. They said, let's do it. This tampering stuff, I think it's widespread. I agree with Andrew. I can't imagine that this is a isolated incident.
Yeah, unless you're recording guys or monitoring them at
Right.
all times, you just don't know. And most times it is happening. And Jimmy, you said it best, the Lakers. I mean, come on. I mean, you got the reigning sixth man of the year, the guy who finished second in Sixth Man of the Year voting in Dennis Schroeder. You add Wesley Matthews. There's reports that, as you mentioned, Bogdanovich, they're looking at Serge Ibaka. Marc Gasol is also a name. So LeBron is set up to repeat, and this Lakers team is real scary. But guys, another aspect of free agency that I also wanted to touch on was, we mentioned his name earlier, Gordon Hayward. He declined that $34.2 million player option. A lot of people very shocked that he did so. You don't pass up that amount of money for 1 year. He's obviously looking for long-term financial stability. But Chris, I have to think, do you think this is a wise move? Even if he does get, and there's a report that he might get a 4-year, $100 million deal, that's 25 annually. But do you think it's a smart idea to opt out of $34 million?
I think it's questionable because it's so much money. And if he puts in another good year with the Celtics, because ever since the injury, Jimmy said it earlier, not the same, but showing me something in the last year. If he puts in another good year, then he cashes out. I don't know. Does he want to be a New York Knick? I don't know that he wants to be a New York Knick. I think his best fit might be the Indiana Pacers, but maybe it's a factor of the injury that he had. It was a brutal injury, one of the more memorable injuries that I've seen. Maybe he wants long-term stability.
Yeah, that's where I was going with it. I actually think it makes sense. I mean, look at what's going on the rest of the league. I mean, Jeremy Grant got $60 million for 3 years for 6 weeks of good basketball. I mean, Gordon Hayward can do better than that. Yeah, the number I had heard was like 4 years, $100 million. Yeah, and then it becomes a question of, would you rather have the 1 year with 34 or the 4 years with 25 per?
Right.
It's not an easy call, but I think going for that long-term stability, not betting on yourself with the way things have gone for Gordon Hayward over the last couple of years, I think at the end of the day, that'll actually be the smart move. Whether he wants to be a Knick or a Pacer, I mean, the Pacers made some moves that maybe preclude them from doing that. But I think at the end of the day, the long-term stability for Gordon Hayward, probably the biggest thing he's looking for. And I think from his point of view, it's a smart move.
And I would say this, because this is confusing to me, because you're in a great spot in Boston. You're there with your former coach from Butler and Brad Stevens. And to decline $34 million, if you're Gordon Hayward and you have a good season again and you play a majority of the season, if the cap does go up for the 21-22 season, you could see yourself make even more money then. So I think it says a lot about the situation in Boston and the fact that maybe Hayward was thinking, with Tatum here, with Jaylen Brown here, and Kemba Walker, I've become kind of the fourth banana, and I think I can contribute more and be more of a factor on a potential contending team. So I think it also says a lot, because the situation, it's a great one, and to get paid $34 million for 1 year where you might go to the NBA Finals, you're a few games away this past season in the bubble, just it's hard for me to fathom that Hayward wouldn't at least take this year, see what he can do, and then maybe see what he's worth on the open market, a year from now. But again, free agency is crazy nevertheless. And Jimmy, I know you had some words on the Detroit Pistons, some questionable moves. I mean, it looks like they're just signing everybody who was on the Denver Nuggets, and they let Christian Wood walk to Houston. I mean, they had a great draft getting Killian Hayes, Sadiq Bey, but this free agency start for them, it has to be a disappointment.
I'm just trying to figure out where they're going with this. Like, I mean, you've got Blake Griffin. That's one. You signed Plumlee. You signed Grant. You're sitting here, and it's just like every big man. It's like, sign him up. I struggle to understand the logic. Like, the NBA, generally speaking, is going towards smaller, more shooting. The Pistons are zagging as everybody else zigs. And it's just so weird to me. And it's not in an analytically inspired way, like, oh, this is interesting, we'll see how this goes. This is like galaxy brain type stuff the Detroit Pistons are doing right now. I don't know what the point of it is, and I'm very skeptical that it's going to work.
Turn left when everybody else turns right. Sometimes it ends up working, Jimmy. I say don't knock it. Don't knock it till you try it.
I would just say Jeremy Grant deserves $60 million. He played his butt off in the bubble. But if you're Detroit, you don't want to be that team that takes that bet and tries to invest $60 million on a guy who really essentially had 2 good months of basketball to work with, a small sample size. But again, Detroit's trying to make a change. A lot of teams, Atlanta getting Gallinari. The East is still open from seeds 5 to 8. So a lot of teams there are trying to make their way and become playoff contenders again. So until the moratorium ends officially tomorrow, players will not be able to sign, but still a lot of moving parts in free agency for the rest of this weekend. I do want to get into another few headlines here in the association. Perhaps the biggest news injury-wise, Golden State Warriors star Klay Thompson suffering a season-ending tear in his right Achilles after a workout on Wednesday, had an MRI on Thursday morning. It was announced Friday that he would be out for the season. Chris, the Warriors lose one of their Splash Brothers. How do you think this affects them moving forward as they try and contend in the West?
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy that I really feel for at this point. We haven't seen him since the finals in 2019. Gets hurt again. And this is a team that's just falling out of contention. I don't know. They by the way, they trade a first round pick now to go get the guard.
To get Kelly Oubre.
Right. And how about the Oklahoma City Thunder with, I think it's 20 first round picks in the next 6 years or something like that. It's crazy. But yeah, I just feel terrible. I feel terrible, the injury like this. And I'm seeing a criticism of the Warriors for the deal that they gave him. And I don't know how you could hand out that criticism. It's just, these are the kind of things that you have no control over. And I just feel that they're going to lose Klay Thompson for a second year in a row. And that's a shame to the whole sport.
And it's a double whammy because he hurt his left knee in the finals in 2019.
Yep.
And he tears his right Achilles.
Yeah.
This is going to be tough to come back from, frankly. And I love Klay Thompson, love his game, love watching him next to Steph Curry. It's a bummer. There's just no other way to put it. It's a bummer for the Warriors. It's a bummer for Klay Thompson. It's a bummer for basketball, honestly. This is one of the most fun guys in the sport. You know, we've seen the videos of him talking about like scaffolding and dumb stuff like that. But it stinks. I mean, you just hate to see that. And, you know, the Warriors go into this year, probably won't be very good again. And, yeah, it's tough. Like I was really just so bummed out when I saw that he had hurt himself on Wednesday and then it got confirmed on Thursday what it was. Yeah, you just feel for the guy. It's tough.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to go through the same thing John Wall is about to embark on, and that's, you know, going 2 years or nearly 2 years without playing a meaningful basketball game. And again, speedy recovery to him, and I think the league is much better when he's playing and when the Golden State Warriors are a factor. Obviously, the West is going to be a bloodbath. CP3 going to Phoenix, other teams like Portland adding Covington. You know, you talk about the Denver Nuggets. You know, the Clippers lose Montrez, but they still have Kawhi and PG. So the West, very much, you know, wild, you know, in order to take that saying, the Wild Wild West. But again, just a huge significant loss for the Warriors, and we'll see what happens with them this season. One more thing of note, guys, the Toronto Raptors are going to start the NBA season next month in Tampa, Florida, because of travel restrictions that the Canadian government put into place stemming amid the coronavirus pandemic. And because training camps start on December 1st, the Raptors were pressed to make a final decision. They were looking at other sites in the past several weeks, including Sunrise, Florida, the home of the NHL's Florida Panthers. But Jimmy, they find a home in Tampa, makes it easier now with travel. So what do you expect in terms of traveling moving forward? Do you see teams going back and forth from East Coast to West Coast, or should we see a schedule be condensed to be more primarily against teams that are there in your division or teams that are close by?
It's so hard because, you know, you could play, like, you could have the teams in the East play each other. You could have teams in the West play each other. It's harder in the NBA because, like, for example, you have the Memphis Grizzlies who are in the West in Memphis. You have, the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are in the West, and the closest teams to them are in the East. So you could regionalize it that way, but that would be hard to pull off. And you talk about the Raptors decision. I mean, Canada is reimposing, I just saw last night, a month-long lockdown, basically. They had, I think, 4,000 cases yesterday. The U.S. had like 193,000. So there's no reason for the Canadian government to let the Raptors in. That's why they made this move. That being said, it's interesting for the Raptors because depending on the vaccine, they could, I guess, finish the year in Canada, depending on how that goes. But we'll just have to see what happens. I'm not surprised that it did. This is a big uprooting, though. It's not like what the Toronto Blue Jays did going right over the border to Buffalo. This is entirely different. So it'll be interesting to see what the Raptors make of this, how good they wind up being. At the end of the day, I think they'll probably be okay because they're well coached and they've got a good team. But yeah, I mean, Tampa is not next door to Toronto, but they get to play a little nicer place for the winter. I think we could probably agree, and we'll see how it works out.
Well, when the Blue Jays moved to Buffalo, and that was this summer, and I'm almost thinking that it was us three on a Zoom just like this. I was in my basement at the time, and we said, yeah, the Toronto Blue Jays can't play in Canada. They got to go to, and that feels like so long ago. And this it tells you how we are still in this thing. And, one of my takes is that these leagues, after suffering really bad years on the financial bottom line, they could take a bad year, but I don't know that these leagues are prepared to have another bad year as far as not having people in the seats. These leagues are, for instance, baseball, they want to get a full season in. Basketball, the same case, because to do it again. So I don't know if they'll regionalize, but they want to be able to pull this off. I sincerely hope that we can, because we've been hoping for a long time now. But this is just another sign that Canada says we don't really want American basketball teams coming into our country, and that's just representative of what we're still fighting here.
Yeah, and I would just say, obviously, I know Toronto would love to be playing there, have fans in Jurassic Park, but considering the circumstances, if you want to play a season, you have to do it in the safest way possible. This gives them that opportunity to complete a full season in Tampa. So I think that's the most important thing, making sure they're healthy, safe, and they're able to complete a full season. But those are my headlines for this hour. Fellas, I will see you in the next hour with some college basketball and college football headlines.
Visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
New York's longest running sports call-in show with Jimmy Sullivan. I'm Chris Baccia, and now we're joined by Franklin Ncaa of slam.com. You can find him at slamonline.com. Franklin, first of all, thanks so much for joining us to talk a little NBA, free agency getting underway, the draft now in the rearview mirror. How are you this evening?
Excited to be here early Saturday morning, so ready to talk some hoops.
Yeah, let's talk hoops, and let's start with the draft. Georgia's Anthony Edwards. He goes to the Minnesota Timberwolves. I think this is the first piece to hit on. Number 1 overall pick. You did a piece on him. Your take on this guy? You say he is going to make the Timberwolves proud as a number 1 pick. They're going to be glad they took him. Your perspective?
Yeah, I think, and Edwards, first of all, just physique wise, I mean, he just has the NBA body already, right? When you put him next to some of the other guys that are getting drafted, other guards getting drafted in this class right here. He has an amazing story. I mean, you talk about perseverance, lost his mother and his grandmother in 8th grade. And had to find a way to get through it. Technically he did not start focusing on basketball until he was in high school. He's pretty much sat that, he caught some heat going into the draft because he, gave a couple of quotes about how much he loves football, and he could probably be just as good of an NFL player as an NBA player. And, he caught some heat for that. And the timing of that story was very weird. It came out the day before the actual draft. But, he was all in on football until he got into high school, and then eventually transitioned into focusing solely on basketball in high school. And so just the last 4 or 5 years, he went from an unranked kid to, number one in his class. And so, I mean, he's a dog. I mean, very, very, assertive kid, feisty, very, he is gonna, the one thing you're going to get from him right away is that it's effort. It's going to be energy. He loves talking, trash talking. So I think you can't. It's such a safe pick. You can't go wrong with Ant number one there.
Franklin, one of the narratives I saw on social media, which I thought was a little odd, was people were talking about Anthony Edwards maybe not having the drive or desire to get better, and I thought that was a little odd. And then I read your piece, and you talked a lot about his competitiveness, his willingness to learn and get better. For those who haven't read your profile of Anthony, what did you learn about his competitiveness, his drive in the process of reporting that story that makes you think that he's going to put the time in once he gets to the NBA level?
Yeah, he gave a very funny anecdote. We were talking about we were talking about quarantine and how usually the pre-draft process is a 3-month process. This year became an 8-month process, and how he had to still remain active and try to not be bored during that entire period, just waiting and waiting and waiting. And we were talking about new things that people were picking up during quarantine, right? New skills, new things that people were trying. And he said that his brother, his trainer, one of his friends, and him, they were staying together during lockdown. They picked up ping pong, right? They were playing ping pong. That became a thing. And obviously he had not played ping pong prior to 2020, prior to the lockdown. And so he was saying how he was getting beat up on. He was losing a lot, and, became frustrated, tongue in cheek, kind of joking, but also there was that part of him that, that competitive part of him. He hated the fact that he was losing to them constantly. And he pretty much said that he began practicing to the point where now he was like, they'll be lucky if they get a couple of points on me. And I was kind of making a point, something as minor as that, right? That he would take it to offense to the point that he would go all out on practicing. He made it, he pretty much said himself that he made it a thing where he went in there and made sure that he took the time and energy to really get better at it. And obviously it's not the same thing as basketball. They're two completely different things, but I think little things like that kind of just show how much of a competitor he really is. And so, it's so weird because during the pre-draft process, a lot of those stories and articles are they're coming from rival agencies and rival agents. And so a lot of it's smoke and mirrors, and it's really hard. It's amazing how every time during the pre-draft process, you get so much contradicting reports about the same players. It happens all the time, depending who the source is and who it's coming from. So I did read a couple of those. I mean, like I said, the story about him saying that, he really, his passion was football growing up, and that, especially, growing up in Georgia, and he played football all the way up to essentially when he got to high school. So that's the timing of that story was really interesting. And there was a couple of quotes that kind of came off a little bit, people took it and ran with it. It was one of them when he said he doesn't really necessarily enjoy watching basketball as much. And I think people definitely took that and ran with it. But if you just watch tapes, right, and watch his game, and I'm pretty sure the Timberwolves did a whole lot of that, you see just the competitive drive and how much it, and I think in the story, what I was trying to say is that it kind of, there was that meme during the Last Dance, right? A bunch of memes came out of the Last Dance, but one of them was when Jordan was and I took that personally. And Edwards is that kind of guy, something as small as ping pong ball and losing constantly. And him just decided he's had enough, and really, he was just bragging about how much better he got, and the fact that he was able to beat up on them by the time, the summer rolled around.
Another guy that you've covered, Franklin, is Cole Anthony, and he goes to the Magic, and really, to me, cool to see the emotion there. Something you also saw with Obi Toppin, the Knicks pick. How does he translate to the NBA? He brings the IQ, is a thought from UNC, played a little bit in New York City. What does Cole Anthony bring to the NBA?
Yeah, I think with him is, obviously he's tenacity. He's a very vocal player, vocal guy on the court. Very hard nosed. You got to think like Cole Anthony. That obviously being Greg, he's prepared. I mean, he's had the right people around him for such a long time. We shot a cover with him when he was in high school. It was right after his junior year, and funny enough, on the cover he's wearing his dad's New York Knicks 50 jersey, number 50 jersey. So he was wearing down the cover, foreshadowing, whatever you want to call it, a little bit of, sprinkle good luck in there. And as it turns out, now he's an NBA player. He's going to be actually playing with Mo Bamba, who was his AAU teammate with the Magic now. So he's going to be reunited with Mo Bamba down in Florida. So it's just, I think he's a very tenacious player, very hard-nosed. Obviously, there's a couple of things here and there that we'll see how it translates to the NBA. But I think overall, Cole's one of those guys, like a lot of guys like Ant, who just came up a little bit later on it in their, I would say sophomore, junior year, kind of into the national spotlight. Like, it's really hard to go in as an 8th grader, 9th grader, be like a top 10 kid, top 20 kid, and remain there, by the time you're a senior and going to college. And he was able to do that. And that's not as easy as people think. Usually, like those freshman high school rankings, by the time you're a senior, like that whole list is usually shuffled, upside down all over the place. And Cole was one of those guys that actually was able to maintain his spot pretty much consistently for the past, 4 or 5 years. And, UNC didn't have the best of seasons, and, he's had a lot of injuries, and I feel like he's caught a lot of heat, and, probably maybe affected his draft stock a little bit. But despite the fact that UNC didn't have the greatest of seasons, and the fact that he was injured, and the fact that he was still, remain a top 15, top 20 pick, I think, says a lot about, just how much teams were high on him.
Franklin, staying on the subject of Cole Anthony, you were just referencing it. It was a lot of adversity that he's gone through in the past year. He gets injured. UNC has a bad year, probably through no fault of his own, just, kind of one thing leading to another. And all that's obviously before COVID. I'm curious, that kind of adversity that he went through in his year at North Carolina, how much do you think that could actually, in a backwards kind of way, almost help him as he goes to the NBA, being that he just had, a ton of adversity, dealing with injuries and dealing with losses? I think he made the point that it was the first time he'd ever been under 500 in his basketball career, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to put it, right? Sometimes you get drafted and you go to a team, and most of these guys, they're the best players in their team, first and foremost. Their teams usually don't struggle much, right? They're the cream of the crop. And then you go into the NBA and you're playing for a young team, and now you're more in the losing column than you are in the winning column. And so that is a huge adjustment for a lot of guys, and not that Cole's used to it, because this was the one and only year that he pretty much had to go through that. But I think it does help in terms of, he probably was not criticized as much as he was the last 6 months, right? He was a top ranked player. Everyone in New York showed him love. He went down to UNC. And so he was under a lot of scrutiny, under a lot of pressure. The team did not perform as well. There were injuries. A lot of things went wrong. And probably for the first time in his life, he had to get used to speaking, to the media about struggling and, how to try to turn the ship around. And so, because, you're only there for 6-7 months, right, in college. And so, yeah, you get better. There's so much you can do. But a lot of it is like, can you just mentally prepare for what's about to come next? And I think in his case, he definitely had a crash course on, like, what it was like to be on the other side of it, which a lot of NBA players, when you get drafted, that's the side that you're going to be on at least for a few years. And so hopefully, he can take all of that and really apply it, and it'll be a much more smoother process in NBA. And, not that the Magic are going to be like, struggling necessarily as much as UNC was last season per se. But yeah, I think it's a good point in terms of, for the first time ever, he had to deal with questions from media and scrutiny that he never in his life had to deal with. And usually that's something that guys deal with for the first time when they first get to the league, you know.
Staying in the New York area, Obi Toppin goes to the Knicks at number 8. I want to ask you about this prospect. And just looking ahead, we're now in free agency, started 6 p.m. last night, and the Knicks have money to spend. Gordon Howard, perhaps a pursuit. Your thoughts on Obi Toppin? He joins the Knicks, and how this team looks in free agency.
Yeah, I think it's so dope. I think it's so cool. Obviously, a New York kid, right? So a Brooklyn kid, hometown kid. You know, you saw him crying. He was clearly very emotional to, you know, be able to just suit up for his hometown team. I think. I mean, he has an amazing story, right? You know, he was unranked coming out of high school, no D1 offers coming out of high school. You know, had to do a 5th year of prep school just to try to get, you know, he wasn't going to junior college because he had no offers. Ends up doing a 5th year of prep school, and that's where really the offers picked up, right? He went to 4 high schools in 5 years. You know, like you're talking about a kid that like moved around a lot, and it wasn't looking, you know, very promising for such a long time. You know, he did a couple years down in Florida, comes up to Westchester for junior and senior year, awesoming, has no offers, is unranked. This has to go to prep school, so goes down to Mount Zion Prep in Baltimore. And that's really where the offers start to pick up. And ultimately, he just has to go to Dayton. But then even then, he does not play as a freshman, right? He's academically ineligible his first year there. And so, I mean, you know, he really like just came into the national spotlight like a year ago, right? A year and a half ago. And so he worked for it. You know, he worked to get there. And, you know, I mean, at pick number 8, you know, they're drafting the Naismith National Player of the Year. You know, and if you're the Knicks, like, you know, it doesn't. You can't out get something better than that at pick 8, right? You know, and so I think you know, and Dame was one of the best teams in the country. It's not like he was a leading scorer for this team that was like, you know, like somewhere else. Like, you know, they were projected to potentially be a, you know, Final Four team, Sweet 16 team had the actual tournament ever happen. So I mean, I'm excited for it. I think, you know, he was on ESPN like almost after every single night, right? You know, I mean, his electrifying dunks. I think he was on ESPN probably much more than any other college player last season, you could probably argue. And so, you know, shot 40% from the 3-point line. So it's not like he's just like a dunker or he's going to be down in the paint. So I think I'm excited. I think it's a very exciting pick. You know, and not even just like Obi, right? They got him, you know, Emmanuel quickly as well, right? And you know, that's another guy like, you know, that's SEC Player of the Year. You know, he led Kentucky in scoring, like the Kentucky in scoring. You know, he shot something like it was like 42, 43 from the 3-point line, right? You know, he's known as a deadly shooter. And a lot of those guys that go to Kentucky, like, you know, they're so stacked, right, with talent that usually they don't even get a chance to showcase their entire game. Like, you know, he was there to shoot and play defense, but like he's a point guard. Like he can run the team, he can run the offense. And so I feel like a lot of guys, you know, a lot of people will be shocked when they get a chance to see him in the league. Like he can do a little bit more than just like shoot and play defense. But obviously, when you're at Kentucky, you got to sacrifice a lot of your game because you're sharing the floor with, you know, with a bunch of all Americans, right? So I think, you know, guys like, you know, yeah, I mean, SEC Player of the Year, led Kentucky in scoring. I mean, 6'8" wingspan, right? I think those two picks, you know, and even a guy like Miles Powell, right, who they just picked up and the Knicks did as a free agent essentially. And, you know, Big East Player of the Year, right? Let's see home scoring. He's used to playing at the Garden and having big games at the Garden, you know, the last 4 years. And, you know, I think Seton Hall won the regular season for like the first time since like 1993 or something like that, you know. So he did his thing there. And I think he's an exciting one too, you know, and he also has the New York, New Jersey flair in terms of guard swagger. So I think they had a really good night free agency wise. Draft night wise, free agency wise. Obviously, we're talking about the Knicks here, and they haven't been the most successful in getting done in that regard. So I'm not too sure. There's obviously a bunch of rumors out there and potential things, but I do think that draft night wise, I think they did as good as they could probably do with what they had.
Taking a 30,000-foot view of the draft here, I find it very interesting. I was looking at the draft, and you made this point in the Cole Anthony series as well, that you look at the draft this year, you have James Wiseman going at number 2, basically didn't play last year. LaMelo Ball goes at 3. He had played overseas for a couple of years. RJ Hampton is another American product, went and was not playing college basketball here. And the Knicks wind up with the guy who is the best player in college basketball, a guy who pops off the screen every time you watch him, and Obi Toppin at number 8. I'm curious just what you make of the draft process that, you know, a guy like the best player in college basketball, like the SEC player of the year and the Big East player of the year, can fall through the draft, and then you maybe see some of these other guys who weren't necessarily playing college basketball, but who were able to go high up off the board.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a good question. I mean, I'm curious if part of it is like, you know, you're drafting a guy that's like 22. He's more on the older side for a draft player. And, you know, a lot of NBA teams just love drafting based on like, you know, down the road kind of big picture promise. And so I'm curious how much of that played a role in him kind of sliding a little bit to number 8 as a 22-year-old rookie, or I'm not sure when he's going to turn 23 exactly, but that may have played a role. I think what's interesting about this draft, right, is that aside from what you mentioned about all the guys that either played overseas or, you know, in the case of James Wiseman, finished his college career very, very early back in probably a year ago, is that a lot of these dudes have not played competitive basketball. You count like LaMelo and James Wiseman are probably like pretty much a year from the moment they're going to actually debut in the NBA, right? And you know, there was no, so a lot of the guys were just kind of working out because of COVID in their own hometowns. Usually the agencies either put them together in Thousand Oaks in LA, or, you know, they grab all their guys with real trainers and they put them in wherever they're based out of. And this year there was not a lot of that. Everybody was kind of training on their own in their own respective cities. And I'm one of those that I part of me feels like the rookies this year, I mean, dude, they're supposed to report to training camp in like 9 days, right? I kind of feel like, and now this is not going to happen, but they should kind of sit down for like 2-3 months and kind of get acclimated a little bit to the NBA before they actually like start playing. Obviously, that's not really going to happen, but I mean, part of me is scared for them, but part of me feels bad for them. Like, I don't know if they know what they're getting into. This is like the NBA. This is like the actual NBA. No summer league, like no real, you know, summer league is not the NBA, obviously, in terms of like talent, but like, you know, usually the guys spend the summer in whatever city and town they're in, and they train in the actual NBA facilities with the real NBA trainers. There was none of that this year. You know, they're getting drafted and they're going straight into training camp, and then they're getting thrown straight into the wolves. And some of those guys, by the way, have not played basketball competitively in a year. So all of that really scares me for a lot of them. And so I'm honestly like, I'm not even sure that some of these kids should even be going straight into like getting on the floor. I feel like a couple of them, most of them should probably like sit out for a couple of months. And again, this is a hot take because it's definitely not happening. But I am a little fearful. You know, the expectations for LaMelo are obviously through the roof. And it's so unfair for a kid that hasn't had played basketball in a year. And all of a sudden has to debut in the NBA right off the bat. No summer league, no training at the facility during the summertime. None of that. And by the way, he didn't even get like a normal pre-draft process where he really gets a chance to really, you know, it's just bizarre in so many ways. And I, you know, like everyone's like, well, you know, every player's gonna have to deal with that, right? LeBron finished playing basketball, 8 weeks ago, whatever. But it's a difference between a veteran doing it and a rookie literally getting thrown straight into the fire 10 days after he got drafted. So I think in general, I'm a little, I don't want to say scared for them or concerned for them, but they are getting thrown straight into the wolves like no other class in history has ever had to, which we'll see how that looks.
Certainly strange times all around us. Can't avoid it. Franklin Ncaa of slamonline.com. That's where you can find him. Thank you so much for taking the time on one-on-one, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you, guys.
Has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
advantage as we approach the 1 o'clock hour. And by the way, we're with you until 2 a.m. on your radio dial. Like I said, there's a lot of cause for optimism, as we teased at the beginning of the show. But we got to start really with the news of the week. That's Robinson Cano. He gets suspended for the entire 2021 season after he tests positive for PEDs now a second time in his career. And all I can think about is how ill-fated the Robinson Cano experiment was to go and trade for the 36-year-old, how this thing was a disaster of massive proportions, every angle of it, and now it's somehow just found a way to be an even worse acquisition. And that makes me feel happy to know that the executive who brought him in is no longer in the building.
I think the only way the Cano thing can get worse is if Jared Kalenic becomes a stud in Seattle, or if Justin Dunn comes through. Oh my goodness. No, but you bring up a good point. And the funniest thing is, what I was sitting there say, okay, Cano, the first words I read were Cano tested positive. And immediately I thought COVID.
Right.
And I read the headline, and I'm sitting there, I'm like, wait a minute. The Mets are fine, because it's just move McNeil down to second and figure out the outfield. Or, I mean, there's a bunch of different options you could go through, and we'll get into that later. But the Mets are okay. I mean, you think about last season, and I'd read a story in the Post that Joel Sherman wrote, where basically he said that Major League Baseball did next to no PED testing last year. So you think about how Robinson Cano was maybe able to hit 300. But like they'll be okay. And they have an owner now who, if he just wanted to eat the last 3 years of that contract, if that was what he wanted to do, he could just do it. So look, this is, if we were having this conversation last year, I would have said, oh no, this is really bad for the Mets. But if you were to pick anybody to lose, as terrible as this sounds, probably go with Robinson Cano. And I think the Mets will be okay. They've got guys that can put it second, namely Jeff McNeil. I think they'll be just fine.
Yeah, I think that is the take here, is that, this news broke, and I didn't really wince. I think he's been not a good contributor. The only time he hit 300 was now when he was on the performance enhancer. So I wasn't under any belief that he was going to be a big part of this team. We know that the core of this team is Peter Alonso, Jeff McNeil, Michael Conforto offensively. It's not Robinson Cano. I mean, you have to have other pieces, and you have to have somebody who could play a good second base. I don't even know that he does that well anymore. So I think this actually opens up the infield for the Mets. I mean, you're right about McNeil going to second base. It's the Mets think that that's actually where he's best, with his glove. But this is a free agent market that I expect the Mets to be active in. Talk about a DJ LeMahieu, but then talk about the trade market of Francisco Lindor. We're going to talk about those guys a little later. As easy, they could easily plug that hole. They will be improvements. And then the other side of this is just that when this happens a second time to an athlete, I think Robinson Cano joins a pretty small group. I could be wrong about that. That's arbitrary, but not a lot of guys test positive and they make the mistake and it's forgivable. And I think it's now an 80-game suspension that baseball hands down for the first offense. But baseball upped their punishments a couple years back. They said, second time, you're done for the year. A third time, you're banned for life. For a guy to test positive twice, he moves pretty far down my list in terms of the respect. Robinson Cano building a Hall of Fame career, an absolutely outstanding player. It's really a shame to see. It's really disappointing. I don't want to slap him on the wrist, and because he's going to get a real slap on the wrist of $24 million that he won't be making this season. But it's just a shame to me.
It is. I should also mention, you talk about the small group Robinson Cano enters of testing positive twice.
Yeah.
Another member of that group came in second place to buy the Mets. So that's part of this discussion. Most guys, they're out of the game. Alex Rodriguez did it and he was fine. I will also mention this. The Mets are obviously not in penny pinching mode anymore, but I feel compelled to bring this up. So Robinson Cano would have gotten $24 million this year. The Mets got off the hook for all of that. And the Mariners still had to kick in $4 million as part of the agreement. That goes to the Mets. So you think about what the Mets have done this offseason, and really the big move, kind of the only really big move, was Marcus Stroman so far, accepting the qualifying offer. They just got Marcus Stroman for free. Like that's how you have to look at this if you're a Mets fan. Is yes, I mean the finances are not the concern that they were under the Wilpons, but you were just able to pick up a guy who could be a shot in the arm for a starting rotation that was absolutely terrible last year for free, and actually gained money on the transaction. I think that's good business. So you'll take that if you're the Mets. In like a sick and backwards and bizarre way, this actually works out really, really well for the New York Mets. So Robinson Cano tests positive. It's an embarrassment. He ought to be ashamed of himself. We're in agreement on that. But beyond that, the Mets are like, okay, we'll take the $24 million. That's fine. So I think they woke up, they saw that, and they said, okay, we got some options here.
I agree with you, and I think it opens things up for Sandy Alderson. We talked about a couple of the names, and we'll launch into them when we come back from a quick break. I'm not sweating this. I'm not worried about this. I think the $24 million gets reinvested right away. Crazy thing about Cano is that after this year, the Mets are still on the hook for 2 more seasons of him, of $24 million a pop, both years. It's crazy to think that, I mean, if this is what he did in the first two, and this will be the 3rd year that he's been a Met, 1 year he'll sit the entire one out. The first 2, he didn't do anything. And then they still got 2 more. I mean, I don't want to, be a broken record, but what a terrible trade. What a god-awful deal that was. And when it happened, it felt weird. It definitely felt like one of those trades that on paper, it didn't look so good. And here's the ending of it. That's the story.
Yeah, Edwin Diaz was the good part of that trade.
That's what
That's where we're at right now. I saw the best opinion I saw on this before we go to break. I forget his name. The guy from Blade Runner tweeted at Steve Cohen and just said, "Release him." That's just so 2020 in Mets fandom. But yeah. Blade Runner guy had a point.
I can't wait to talk a little bit more about Steve Cohen and some of the plans for the Mets on the other side of this station identification. Will allow WFUV to identify itself, and then we'll come right back and talk to you in a little bit.
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUV Sports.org.
On One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show, I'm Chris Baccio with Jimmy Sullivan. It is now 12:55 in the morning. We're approaching our final hour with you, and we'll take you till 2 a.m. on YouTube and on your radio dial. Jimmy, we're talking Mets. We just talked about Robinson Cano. Let's get it out of the way because, like we said, it's really no sweat for this team. If anything, it frees them up around the infield. This is a guy who I think would have been a liability to the lineup, quite frankly. Instead, the Mets get the chance to potentially replace him. There's a wish list. Before we get into the wish list, I want to ask you, as far as an executive, because this is an interesting conversation that I think is worth touching on. Theo Epstein is a free agent, if you will, and he says he's sitting the year out. I believe that. I think that's probably true. Sandy Alderson wants to hire a baseball man, a top baseball man. My perspective on this is Sandy is older, and even at the end of his Mets days, he actually got sick and thank God recovered. But he seems like someone who wants to leave the Mets with a great baseball infrastructure and have a successor. So whoever they hire as president of baseball operations, I think inherits Sandy's role as not just baseball ops president, but team president. That sounds like a very appealing role for a Theo Epstein, potentially run the Mets one day and be Sandy Alderson's successor. That's the only area where I see the connection, because a lot of people are saying, no, he wants a bigger job than that. But he may get it, because I don't know how long Sandy Alderson is here. I know I'm long-winded, but let me know your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, because I'm with you on that. He's not going to do it this year.
Right.
So then you're trying to figure out, all right, well, do we bring in, a placeholder for that kind of role? And then it's like, well, all right, well, if you hire Theo as your team president, and we'll see what the Mets wind up doing. And they've been linked with certain candidates like Mike Chernoff, Michael Hill from the Marlins for president of baseball ops, and then that person would hire a GM. Like, it's a big, kind of like Dodgers style model.
Right.
I don't know who they will get for that. I think Sandy is interesting because, like you said, he's older, and he's, the team president of communications, of everything, basically. Right. So he is not handling the day-to-day baseball stuff. He wants to hire somebody else to do that.
Yep.
How long is he in that job? I don't know. I mean, it depends, because it seems like he's delegating a lot of stuff. And I don't say that in a bad sense. I think, delegating is good.
Yeah.
And you saw his opening press conference after Steve Cohen talked. I saw it. That's the happiest I've ever seen him. Yeah. Like, he was ecstatic. Like, you could tell, being with the Mets the first time around, and he was basically foisted upon the Wilpons by Major League Baseball because things were going so bad with the Mets at that time. And you could tell it was wearing on him then. He came back. He's cracking jokes with people. Like, they would call on a reporter to ask a question, and he'd be like, Ronnie! Like, he, had just seen that guy for the first time in years. It was really cool to see. But I think he's going to be – I would be surprised if he's maybe in that role for a few years. I think Theo Epstein, I look at the jobs for him in the next offseason, I think Philadelphia actually makes a lot of sense. It's a little frightening. But I do think that out of the places that need a Theo Epstein, Philadelphia is probably at the top of the list. And, I would be surprised to see them get a guy like that. They spend stupid money. Their owner literally said that 2 off seasons ago. And he could be the guy for there. But it's still cool to think about, a guy like Theo Epstein with the New York Mets, given his track record with the Red Sox and the Cubs and getting cursed teams back to the promised land. So I think it's very interesting to dream. I'm just a little skeptical that that's going to wind up happening. Yeah, so we'll see what winds up happening with the Mets here, but I think it's just good to talk about Theo Epstein and the Mets, for example, in the same sentence. Never thought I'd be doing that, so that's a win in and of itself.
And if he was able to come to New York and bring, and again, we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. The Mets have a lot of work to do, and we'll talk about it. But if he comes to the Mets, gets this team a title, and the Mets are entering a category of, I don't want to say cursed yet. It's been more than 30 years. It doesn't quite qualify as a curse, but it's been a long time. If he goes to Queens and delivers a World Series after he did it in Boston and then did it in Chicago, that would really be, that would, set him up for Cooperstown one day, and he's a young guy. So a very exciting thought. I want to ask you about what the Mets could potentially do this offseason. There's a lot. Top of my list personally is Trevor Bauer. I think this rotation needs another right-hander to pair with Jacob deGrom and Noah Syndergaard when he's healthy. The rotation has actually become a liability. The back end of the rotation, they went and they tried to plug a nosebleed with Michael Wacha and Rick Porcello, and it was ill-fated from the start. Trevor Bauer would be just the right move, and Sandy Alderson even leaned into it a little bit. Bauer leaned into it a little bit. I could see it as a really good marriage.
Yeah, it would be really interesting to ponder, and I think You have Bauer at the top of your list. He's not at the top of my list only because I think there are backup options here. Like if they don't get Bauer, they can audible to Charlie Morton, for example. And Charlie Morton could be really good for a year or two because he's a really good pitcher. Not on a Cy Young caliber, but he could be a really good second or third guy. Top of my list, Chris, you talked about Trevor Bauer. He'd be great to get. Don't get me wrong. Top of my list is Francisco Lindor. You have an opportunity. Yes, you would have to give up some capital to get him. The Mets have the money now where if they trade for him, they can do what the Dodgers did with Mookie Betts and then extend him and give him a huge deal for 10 or 12 years, whatever it winds up being. And this is a guy who is a generational talent. The Mets have not developed a player this good recently. I mean, maybe David Wright in his prime, but this is a guy, unbelievable talent, game changer at a franchise level at the shortstop position. You'll probably have to trade either Rosario or Jimenez or both to get him, which obviously is not what you would want to do. But hey, at some point, you just got to go ahead and do it. And the Mets need guys like that. And this would be a huge splash right away to get one of the best hitters in the league, one of the best defensive shortstops in the league, lock him down to that big contract, and get another great bat in the middle of your lineup, in addition to all the guys you already have.
Yeah, I've heard some folks say that the Mets are further away. They're too far away to go get a Francisco Lindor. And if you got a Francisco Lindor, the first thing you do is extend him, give him a big contract. That's got to be a part of the situation. I'm not one of those people who thinks the Mets are too far away I absolutely think that a Francisco Lindor and a Trevor Bauer, let's say you get both. Talk about a George Springer is also on this market, even DJ LeMahieu, bit of a long shot. But if you get any two of those guys, this team is absolutely ready to compete for a National League pennant. There's no question in my mind. This is a team that is just itching for. They had even the talent to be so much better than they were this year. That's why if you look at the outcomes this season, it's not representative of what's already there. You make two additions, and this team is ready for a run. I absolutely believe that. I agree with you, Francisco Lindor. I would have put him at the top of my list. It was more, I put Bauer there more because it's more realistic to me. You just have to go sign him. You have to give up a draft pick. That's no problem. But Lindor, you mentioned the capital. It's going to cost the Mets something. And I'm on the same page. I would give up an Amed Rosario. I would, absolutely. Do I want to give up him and Jimenez? I don't think so. Because I think the middle of my infield is going to be Andres Jimenez and Francisco Lindor in this event. I don't know that, but Rosario is a guy who we were told was going to become Francisco Lindor, and that hasn't happened, and frankly, that's not happening. So if you have to give up Rosario, and maybe let's think of other pieces. If Cleveland's looking for big league talent, maybe they're looking for a Dominic Smith or a JD Davis, perhaps. I would package two of those guys in. I think I would, to go get Francisco Lindor. He's a generational talent. It would be enormous to bring him in. He's got the attitude. He plays to me the most attractive position in sports, the shortstop position. It would just be a really beautiful thing to see.
It would, and you bring up a great point with the prospects, because I think fans get very attached to prospects, seeing them come up. Maybe they went and saw them play in AA or AAA, whatever the case may be. And you see these guys come up, and it's like, oh, no, we can't. This is the next. Okay. We were talking about Amed Rosario in 2017 was the best prospect in baseball when he came up.
Yep.
And it was like, oh, this guy's going to be awesome.
Yes.
And now we're talking about him. If they don't get Lindor, is he even going to be the starting shortstop?
Probably not.
Right. So, and Andres Jimenez, we're talking about him, and he had a great year last year. Don't get me wrong. But a lot of the same things that were said about Amed Rosario are being said about Andres Jimenez. So I'm not saying I think Jimenez will be better personally, but, you have these like attachments and these conversations, and this guy's going to come up and change the game. And like at some point, eventually it's just got to happen. And, maybe the Mets player development will be better with the new regime. That's what I'm hoping for. But yeah, that's why I'm less attached to these prospects probably than I ever have been in my life, because the Mets, it's just they come up and we put huge expectations on them. And I think that's part of the problem. And a lot of the time it's like, what are we doing here? Like that guy is not what we thought he was. Although I will say the Mets have had some hits too. Pete Alonso, Brandon Nimmo, Michael Conforto. But, there's other guys who've come up and it's been like, yeah, this is what we were hyping, really? So that's why I'm a lot less attached to them. And I would just say, if you can go get somebody like that, just do it. And that's not just for Lindor. If it's, Arenado, which is a long shot, or even, Chris Bryant, which is a really long shot, I think you go ahead and you just do it.
And it's interesting, if you're Cleveland, or let's say you're Colorado and you're on the other side of this hypothetical, who are you asking for? Are you demanding Jimenez, or are you asking for Rosario? I think I'm demanding Jimenez in this case. I think he actually carries more value than Rosario at this point, who has a big league track record, and it doesn't jump off the page. I mean, I do think there's a distinction between these two prospects, because Rosario was a much bigger deal. You said he was the top prospect in baseball. He was. It was him and Gleyber Torres. And look what Gleyber Torres has done. I mean, he looks like he's on pace to be an MVP one day. That is just not the story with Amed Rosario. And to me, actually, frankly, the most disappointing part about his game has been his glove, because we heard so much about his glove. We even heard that he might hit for power in the big leagues, hasn't done that. But worse than that, he was supposed to play a very good shortstop. And there have been times where the Mets have had to think about shifting him on the infield, or even teaching him center field, because he just has not had a very good shortstop glove. And I don't want to rip him, because I think he hit 288 in 20, I think he hit almost 290 in the year prior to this. So he's shown promise, but he is not anything close to a Francisco Lindor. So Lindor is my move there. I mentioned Bauer. Do you think they stand a chance at DJ LeMahieu?
I think it's unlikely. I think they would have to, because DJ LeMahieu's talking about like a 4 or 5 year deal with the Yankees. The Mets would have to fly in at probably that length, but with a much higher average annual value. I haven't seen the figures as to what exactly he wants. I imagine it's a lot. And the Yankees, it's also, I think, important to note that it seems like a lot higher of a priority for the Yankees to get DJ LeMahieu right now than it is for the Mets. The Yankees need him in that lineup. I think we've seen that in the last couple of years. He's a stabilizing presence, often comes through in the clutch. Like, they need him because he's so consistent at the top of that lineup. The Mets getting him is, and I'm not saying like the Mets are as good as the Yankees right now, but DJ LeMahieu's a luxury for the Mets. He's gravy. With all these other guys that they're looking at, with the lineup that they have, they're not factoring DJ LeMahieu into this. So I would be surprised if he's anywhere. I even tweeted out a joke the other day when Cano got suspended. I said, "Bartender, get me a DJ LeMahieu." And I forgot to put "no matter the cost" in the tweet, but that's okay. But I would be surprised if he's anywhere but in the Bronx for the next few years. I just don't see the Yankees letting him leave the building. And if they do, hey, somebody else's huge gain, but I just don't see that happening.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I cannot imagine that the Yankees let him walk away. It would be the opposite of what they are as a franchise, and that's why this is a really exciting brawl that we have sort of primed in New York between the two crosstown rivals, because the Mets are poised to have. This is hopeful. We haven't seen anything yet, but all signs point to the fact that the Mets will have the same killer instinct that the New York Yankees have had our whole lives, and I can't even begin to imagine what that looks like for this city as far as having two excellent baseball teams. So on that note, I don't know that you and I have talked about the Steve Cohen hire. I'm sure we have over these airwaves, but you mentioned his Twitter game. I think this is funny. He is like, if somebody compared him to like a dad with the way he makes these great jokes or I should say terrible jokes, and they just crack me up. I should have brought one up as an example, but he's talking about doing a Bobby Bonilla day. He's talking about I love it. I just love it.
Oh, it's hilarious. Like there was one report the other day that they had interviewed Mike Chertoff to be the president of baseball operations, and he responded to the reporter saying, "Not that I'm aware of." Like, I've never seen anything like that from an owner. It's great. He tweeted out when he first bought the team, I should say, whatever weekend it was, he tweeted out, "Tweet me your suggestions to make your experience better."
Yeah.
And a lot of people do that, and then they see the replies and they just don't listen. He's actively going back and forth with the fans, taking their suggestions. It sounds like they're going to do an Old Timers Day, which I think is great at some point, whether it's next year or the year after. And it's fun to have, because the Wilpons were the exact opposite of this. The Wilpons did not engage with the fan base. They did not listen to what we said. And granted, at a certain point, like the Mets would tweet out the "we lost" tweet, basically, and all the suggestions would be fire this person, fire that person. It was like the Mets fan equivalent to fix the subway. But you have an owner now who is completely engaged with the fans. He's a fan himself, so I have to imagine he feels a lot of the same frustrations that we have over the last few years. This is great. Like, this is like having one of your own as the owner, except he has $15 billion.
Yeah.
Like, it's fantastic. That's the only difference. But he's just like us. He's passionate. I'm sure, has his players he likes, players he doesn't like. It's great. It's awesome to have a diehard fan of this team stewarding it into the next generation. I think it's fantastic.
It's wonderful for the city. It's just wonderful. It's not a James Dolan. It's not a Johnson family. It's not even a Steinbrenner family. It is something different, which is just really exciting, because the ownership groups that end up buying these teams are usually business people, and that was certainly the case with the Wilpons. And there is something different about this type of business than, for instance, Steve Cohen's other business. He does private equity. You run a baseball franchise a little different, because you have millions of people who are really attached to the product that you put out. I mean, I've lost sleep over this team. I've shed tears over this team. It's not, I understand that the thing that really counts is that I buy a ticket, but there is an emotional connection that I'm very serious about. And I think he is too, and that's just really exciting to me. And another thing that the Mets talked about is building up a farm system, because it's been Brody Van Wagenen disregarded it and stripped it of the only couple of guys that were good in it. I'll give you the last word there. I think the idea that this team can build a Dodgers type of infrastructure where they're working from top to bottom is just really promising.
It is. And you're talking about Brody Van Wagenen, and we obviously killed him for the Cano Diaz deal, but a lot of these other trades are just as detrimental that he made. He traded 2 or 3 prospects for Keon Broxton, traded 2 prospects for Jake Marisnick, including one who was just pitching for the Astros in the playoffs in relief, gave up a prospect for the guy from the Orioles, Miguel Castro, who, why? Like, there's no point to that. So
Terrible.
To hear him talk about that, and you're talking about Steve Cohen talking about that, very encouraging. And the other thing I really liked is, you and I both know that the Wilpons were involved in baseball operations when they owned the team. Very involved. Too involved. Steve Cohen, they flat out asked him about it. He said, well, I played Little League. I don't know enough to say. And so he's going to let Sandy Alderson hire a president of baseball operations. That person's going to run that department. And, he said, I'll be involved. I'll ask pertinent questions, but they're the experts. And that was honestly, Chris, that was the most important thing that I needed to hear in that press conference. So, yeah, very encouraged when I heard that come out of Steve Cohen's mouth.
I think that's a good point. I think that's the biggest point of the conversation. So I'm glad that you wrapped up with that, because it is true. You need to have the division. Let Sandy Alderson run the baseball side. That'll be it for our Mets segment. We will break here, come back on the other side. By the way, the station will identify itself, and then we'll talk a little bit of headlines, college hoops with our man, Andrew Posada. See you in a bit.
WFUV is the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Keep it locked right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org to catch every Fordham basketball game this year. We'll take you through an extraordinary season with live play-by-play and in-depth pregame and postgame analysis. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Final hour here on One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show, taking you up to 2 a.m. I am Andrew Posadas alongside Chris Baccia and Jimmy Sullivan. Some more headlines for you now here. Want to focus on the collegiate level and give you some developing news. Stadium's Jeff Goodman has reported that the Manhattan men's basketball program is the latest to be paused. And I say that because Fordham men's basketball is scheduled to go to Manhattan on December 3rd, 12 days away. We've already seen that the home opener against Iona and new coach Rick Pitino will likely be postponed or canceled. And it looks like this game, which is just 12 days away, and with Manhattan needing a 14-day quarantine, does not look good for the first two games of Fordham men's basketball. But I say that to lead us into this first headline for college basketball. The Division I men's basketball committee announced Monday the relocation of 13 predetermined preliminary round sites for this year's NCAA tournament. They are now in preliminary talks with the state of Indiana and city of Indianapolis to potentially host all 68 teams for the entire tournament come March. Jimmy, I'm going to go to you on this one first. How feasible do you think a one-site tournament is with that many teams?
I think it's actually pretty feasible. I was thinking about this. So the championship weekend Final Four is at Lucas Oil Stadium. So you could use that stadium. They were describing how, they could get that place for 2 weeks because there's not concerts or anything going on right now. And you can have probably up to 4 courts in that building. So you figure, all right, 4 courts. Usually there are 4 different time slots in the first round of March Madness. The first round is going to be the hardest part of this. Once you get past the first round, everything will be fine. So you have 4 courts, 4 time slots, a game on that court. They all start at the same time. That's 16 games right there. And that's a day of basketball. So you could feasibly, I believe, not only do it in one state, but the more I think about this because you'll be down to 64. They'll have to figure out what they do with the first 4. That'll be probably out of Dayton. Usually it's in Dayton. They'll move it somewhere else. So you're down to 64 when you get to the first round. You do 16 games on Thursday and Friday. You're on schedule. So I believe not only can you do the first round of the NCAA tournament, the whole NCAA tournament in a bubble state, you could do the NCAA tournament entirely at Lucas Oil Stadium. I really believe that's a possibility. Now, are they going to do that? Probably not. I've heard talks about, Indiana's Assembly Hall and Butler's basketball arena. But I think if they wanted to explore that route, they absolutely could do it. So when I heard this, I initially was skeptical, and then I thought about it, and I said, this is extremely doable if they're able to get this done and they can start preparing throughout the season.
I think the tournament, of course, is the moment where most people tune into college basketball. The casual fan is maybe following their own team, and then it's March Madness, and it would be a shame to not have it. You have to pull out all the stops to make sure March Madness can happen. It moves so quickly. You're in the Sweet 16 in how long? It takes a week and you're already in the Sweet 16. So it's such a straight shot that it feels like the exact environment for a bubble. And you saw the bubble have some success with the NBA. Baseball was able to do it once they got to the championship series and the World Series. It only makes sense that a plan can be designed. You can have in testing every single day. There's absolutely a way to pull this off the same way the association did. So I agree with you. I think it's feasible. I'm a bit of an optimist here. I know Rick Pitino talked about pushing things to May and doing May Madness, and he said in order that the teams can get enough games in for a team like him who is already dealing with cancellations, Iona, and Andrew just brought up Manhattan. But I sort of think that they can get it in March. I think they'll find a way. A lot of teams aren't going to play a full schedule, but they should get enough games where I think the minimum is 13 to get into the tournament. And I think you'll make sure that the big programs, I think 13, I think enough good teams will hit that threshold.
Yeah, guys, I think this is an overly optimistic, point of view from college basketball. I mean, if you can have all 68 teams in one city, and as Jimmy mentioned, that first weekend, you're going to lose more than half of them anyway. So by next weekend, you would be good to go to stay in that bubble. I think the more realistic version is just having 4 different hub sites, the East, the Midwest, the South, and the West have 4 different bubbles for those. Make it easier because, again, I mean, I understand, the city of Indianapolis, you have Bankers Life Fieldhouse, you have colleges there, Butler, IUPUI, they have their own places. So there are multiple venues in the city, but I think they'd be better off having 4 different bubble cities working like that, having 16 teams in each bubble city, and then from there, allowing the final 16 teams to go to Indianapolis and finish that there. But again, I think it all depends on how many confirmed cases we see continue to pop up throughout the season, Jimmy. If there continues to be a surge and programs continue to be affected, then I think the NCAA will quickly go to what I'm talking about, potentially a 4-hub tournament. But again, I think we are all in agreement, though, that come hell or high water, college basketball is going to finish its regular season and have March Madness after missing out on it, this past year.
Yeah, and this season, by the way, is going to be an absolute mess. Because look at it right now. It is November 22nd, early morning. We're sitting here. We've played 0 games. Just look at Fordham. Fordham has played 0 games and had 2 postponed because the first 2 teams they were going to play. Now, the Manhattan game has not been postponed officially, although if they're following the 14-day quarantine, that's not going to happen.
They're going to have to.
So we're talking about this, and a lot of games have been postponed. And, it's not a problem now. I mean, you hope everybody's okay, obviously. From a scheduling standpoint, it's not a problem now, but when you get into January and February, and you're wiping teams out for 14 days, those teams could miss 4, 5, 6 games. Then you're up against it in terms of having enough minimum games to make the tournament. So this is something to watch. It's a nuisance now. It's going to be a real problem when we get into conference play, and we might have some outbreaks that wipe out teams, within a particular conference.
It's just the reality here, and I'm almost of the mind that, and you see it with football, and we'll get into it, college football, but the easiest time to get sports in was actually this summer, and moving into the fall. As we approach a second wave, we have a second wave at this point. It is a little bit discouraging and a little bit nerve-wracking to think about basketball happening. I mean, it's only November now. Think about January, February. It's a scary thing.
Yeah, and Chris, you mentioned coaches like Rick Pitino. Obviously, Coach K from Duke has also shown some trepidation about a 68-team bubble in Indianapolis. And I think for a lot of these coaches, they've all kind of said the same thing and echoed the same sentiment. Even after a 14-day quarantine, coaches do not want their players to play right away. They want them to have a few days of practice. And that's why a lot of coaches are saying that teams who experienced that 14-day quarantine might not be ready to play another game until maybe another week. So you're talking about 21 days potentially that your team is not playing a meaningful basketball game. And as Jimmy mentioned, you're talking right there, 8 to 10 games when we're talking about teams trying to get to 13, 15 games played to be considered to go to the tournament. It's going to be difficult. And I'm sure there's going to be some leeway, especially if some of the bigger programs experience, a 14-day, 21-day quarantine. But again, as you mentioned, the second wave is here and college basketball hasn't even started yet. And they're already feeling the effects of the pandemic. And another sport feeling the immediate effects right now of the current pandemic is college football, guys. And let me go into my second headline. After this morning, when we found out that Clemson and Florida State would be postponed due to some medical scares and due to a player potentially testing positive, that's 18 games canceled or postponed this week due to COVID-19. 6 top 25 teams will not be in action on Saturday. Guys, this is the third consecutive week with 10 plus games affected. That brings the total to 75 FBS games canceled or postponed this season. Chris, I'm looking at you. How should the upcoming bowl season college football playoff be handled come December?
Well, I think there's a distinction between the two. I think the playoff, you have to be able to do the playoff, and I'm imagining we're talking about a bubble again. I think that is the most feasible plan. Bowl season across the country, I don't know how they're going to pull that off. The kind of energy that draws too, it doesn't even feel right that we would have a bowl season without people in the stands. And I'm thinking that some of the less important bowls may get canceled this year. I don't know, but the playoff, we have to have the playoff. I think it's really the same story as March Madness, especially the football playoff. Talking about 4 teams, they should be able to find a way to do that. And bowl season may be difficult. It's just so discouraging to see all these games canceled. I feel for the athletes. I feel for the coaches. It's just tough.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're seeing at all levels. And I was keeping my eye on during the show. It was Temple, South Florida, and they were about to kick off, and a player had his girlfriend test positive, so they had to stop the game. And then the guy tests positive. They do the contact tracing. They're playing. It's just a weird dichotomy. I mean, I think we are, at least I hope, at kind of peak crazy in terms of trying to play college football right now. We're seeing it in college. My high school was supposed to play today, and then minutes before kickoff, they had, the dreaded conversation with the officials at midfield, and then people started slamming their helmets, and then everybody went home. I mean, I'm assuming that's COVID related. That's the only thing I could think of. And, it's disappointing, yes. Concerning for the people involved, yes. Is it ultimately surprising? I don't think so,
No.
because let's remember, I mean, these are kids in college who are interacting with however many people in their daily lives. They could be as diligent as they want, but you think about the people they come in contact with. At some point, it's just like, okay, um, you're running into trouble here. And I'll be interested to see if any of this slows down really starting next week once kids depart campuses and don't come back for a while. But I hate to say things like this because we're dealing with something that's so serious, and it's a virus that's killed over 250,000 Americans. Am I surprised? No, I'm really not. I kind of figured it would go like this, maybe not to this extent, but to see games canceled, to see things happen at the last minute, no, not really surprised.
Yeah, and guys, it's crazy because most of these teams that have, had to go through postponements or cancellations of games, they've had fans in the stands. So it's kind of like you shoot yourself in the foot. You can't be mad when you have to go to the ER and get surgery, right? I mean, that's the case. And again, I think that speaks to each individual university and their leniency or lack of strict, follow through of these health and safety protocols. If you're going to set a precedent that fans can be in the stands and you're not going to monitor your players 24/7, then you can't be surprised when these type of things happen. And as far as the bowl season's concerned, I think we all would agree that there's only 3 games that matter come, late December, early January. And that's the semifinals of the college football playoff and then the finals, the national championship game. That's it. So, I mean, I know you're going to lose out on money with these specific bowls and, Papa John's, Little Caesars, whoever, they're going to lose out on some money. But again, does Papa John's and Little Caesars really want to put, dozens of college athletes, players, their health at risk just to play a game that really is minuscule in the grand scheme of things? If it's not the college football playoff, if it's not those last 3 games, I just really think those 33 games, Chris, are really expendable at the end of the day.
Yeah, I was getting at it a little bit before. They just aren't of the value of a college football playoff. We talked about the 4 best teams in college football. We want to see them at the end of the season, but the bowl games can be cut away. This conversation is just it just sucks. It's just really tough that we're still fighting it. And Jimmy, you mentioned the kids throwing their helmets down. I could imagine. I mean, that's tough. It's tough, and there's a fatigue, and there's a backlash to reimposing restrictions. You saw New York City shut down schools this week. Nobody wants to do this, and it's just a test of our endurance at this point, because it's coming again. And I sincerely hope that whether it's college football or it's basketball or it's any of the sports, that now they've had the time to prepare a program, get a program in place where we at least have the chance to watch sports. That would make things a little bit easier.
Yeah, and if I could just say one thing about the Bulls, I say this from a human standpoint. A lot of people, of course, and also businesses in America are really struggling right now, and they're about to get into real trouble because at some point, I think it's at the end of the year, money from the federal government runs out, and for one reason or other, there hasn't been an extension of that. So for some of these businesses, wouldn't say all, because obviously, Andrew, you listed off some pretty big names, but I'm sure there are some businesses that get a not insignificant amount of revenue from, the Bad Boy Mowers Gasparilla Bowl or something like that. I think it's the Gasparilla Bowl. I could be wrong on that. But
no, you're right.
we might joke about some of the names of these bowls, but they provide a good kick to these businesses, and to not have that hurts. Is a game like the one I just mentioned necessary? You can debate that, but for a smaller business that might be sponsoring a bowl, maybe it is. So I will say that's the one thing, and I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying go ahead and play the game just because of that. But I think that also needs to be considered here when we talk about some of these lower tier bowls that are not in the New Year's Six.
Yeah, and Chris, I would just say this as a final word. you mentioned, these athletes and the uncertainty and having to walk on eggshells week in and week out, not knowing if you're going to play a game for college football, not knowing if you're going to play once a week. And then for these college basketball programs, not knowing if you're going to be out 2 to 3 weeks and missing multiple games in their own right. So I think it will be interesting to see how both college football and college basketball navigate this second wave that's already upon us, Chris. And I think it's going to be imperative upon the NCAA to make sure that they continue enforcing these health and safety protocols if college football and college basketball want to complete their full seasons.
It's a big task. It's a big task for the conferences, for the programs themselves. We'll see how our own program here at Fordham manages. That, of course, is something that we'll follow for you here at WFUV. He is Andrew Posadas with the headlines. I'm Chris Boccia, Jimmy Sullivan with us as well. We'll take a quick break here, come back with the three of us. We'll take you to 2 o'clock, and we'll talk a little NFL.
WFUV is the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Keep it locked right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org to catch every Fordham basketball game this year. We'll take you through an extraordinary season with live play-by-play and in-depth pregame and postgame analysis. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Jimmy Sullivan, Andrew Posadas with me, and guys, in our break here, I'll be clear here. We're in the morning, so you probably already heard this in the evening. But Gordon Hayward just did a deal. He's going to Charlotte, 4 years, $120 million, and we penciled in football for this segment, and we'll certainly take it there. But first, guys, reactions here. We talked about earlier the kind of money that he passed up on to stay in Boston, and he ends up in getting $120 million down in Charlotte. Seems like a good shake for him.
Very good shake for him. I'm trying to find out. I'm trying to figure out what Charlotte exactly is doing here. So they drafted LaMelo the other night at number 3. They go out and get Hayward on the big deal. They've got Devontae Graham, who's a really, really good young player. Is this team good enough to make headway in the East? No. Can they make the playoffs? Yes. They're in this weird spot. I don't know exactly what the driving force is here. I think Michael Jordan's competitiveness probably has a lot to do with this, but yeah, I'll be honest, it's an odd move for Charlotte. Not sure if I love it.
I would just say this. If you're going to decline a $34 million player option, you have to know that you're going to get at least something close to that. A lot of people thought Gordon Hayward was going to get like 25 to 28 million. Did Charlotte overpay for him at 30 million a year for the next 4 years? Yes. But I think they put themselves in a position where they can fight for a bottom, a bottom four spot in the Eastern Conference. And I think that's the first step going in the right direction. If you're Charlotte, a smaller market team, Chris, you kind of have to swing for the fences, when you have the chance, because not a lot of guys are flocking to go to Charlotte as a free agent. So this is likely a sign and trade, with Charlotte having here about $20 million in free cap space. So we'll see what Charlotte sends to Boston. But again, if you're going to try and make moves and be a playoff contender, I think Gordon Hayward is a step in the right direction if you're Charlotte.
He's a big piece. Yes, it's an overpay, but I like Gordon Hayward, and I'm curious to see Charlotte now. All right, so that's the news of the hour. We're taking you until 2 a.m. here on WFUV, or if you're listening to us on YouTube. And let's talk football here in the final segment, guys. Let's start with Thursday Night Football, because I think this is worth recapping. There's not a lot of Jets-Giants talk to go around. The Giants right now, the talk there is that they look like they stand a chance, believe it or not. Jimmy and I talked about that a little earlier. But this Thursday night game is interesting because it's a preview into an NFC West that can go any which way at this point. I mean, now in sole possession of first place is Seattle after they were able to beat after they beat the Cardinals by 7 on Thursday night. But great game. Your guys' reactions and how you think this division ultimately shakes out.
I have to admit, I did not have the Seahawks defense pulling it out at the end of that game.
They did.
Did not think it was going to go in that direction. Russell Wilson took care of the ball. He had a good game. Didn't put up huge numbers. Kyler Murray is entertaining as anything. And we need to have the conversation. So 2 weeks ago, Andrew and I hosted the show. I said Russell Wilson was the MVP. Since then, Russell Wilson has not played very well. We got to think about Kyler Murray for this. The way he's been playing, a little bit of a down game on Thursday night, but nonetheless, we had an MVP in his second year in 2018 in Patrick Mahomes. In 2019, same situation with Lamar Jackson. Now in 2020 with Kyler Murray, the stuff he does for Arizona, just incredible. Between a Hail Mary on Sunday, he was banged up throughout that game on Thursday, still turned in what I thought was a really solid performance. But the Seahawks now on top of the NFC West, and their games, if you watch the Seahawks on a regular basis, not for the faint of heart, their games are incredible every week. They do not play normal games in Seattle ever. And this was just another example of that. So no, I was not surprised to see a close game on Thursday night.
You know what, guys, with the expanded playoffs, it's crazy. If San Francisco would have stayed healthy, there's an argument that all 4 NFC West teams could make the playoffs. And if you wanted to, one of those teams, the second place team, should just take the NFC East title and let them host the playoff game. But that's another conversation for another day. Some things of note that I saw, it was the first game in 5 weeks that Russell Wilson committed no turnovers. That to me is crazy. When you think about how, great he's been this season, they rely on him so much. He has to throw the ball so much and do so much that he has more turnovers than you think. And he has these games where he has 3 or 4 turnovers, and you would think it's an anomaly, but it's not. And I think that's just how much Russell Wilson means to them, that they have to put everything on his shoulders. And there are going to be games where, if he's having an off night, then as Jimmy mentioned, they find themselves in close games each week, week in and week out. And I think for the Cardinals, this is a team on the come up. They're trending in the right direction. And I think at the end of the day, it all lies on Kyler Murray and his progression. I think when teams contain him and stop him from getting out in the pocket and running the ball, I think when he gets less than 100 yards or less than 80, something like that, they're like 0-4, 0-5. So as long as you can bottle him up in the pocket, and make him throw that ball with his stature, we've seen defensive lines get to him, bat passes down. So I think for Kyler Murray, it's going to be on him to continue progressing as a passer, and for Cliff Kingsbury to put him in positions. But again, the NFC West has been no crapshoot, and there's 3 teams there when you think about the Seahawks, the Cardinals, and the Rams that can go into the playoffs and win a few games.
And you mentioned the third team that's in the mix, and it is the Los Angeles Rams, who are quietly also 6-3. And certainly there are years to come of Russell Wilson and Kyler Murray on the other side of on opposite sidelines going forward. And that's very exciting. Jared Goff does not play into that math for me. I mean, he is not in their league. You talk about Kyler Murray as a potential MVP. I haven't thought about that really. It sounds crazy to me, but I think you might be right. And if it's not this year, it could be next year or the following year. This guy has a lot of room to grow still. So the Wilson and Murray thing just is a great setup for years to come. But I do not put Jared Goff there. I do not put the Los Angeles Rams there. And that's why I think they trail. They're obviously very well coached. They can run the ball. They can obviously play some outstanding defense, which is a big factor. You talk about a Seahawks team that's proven to be vulnerable on defense, although they did make the stop. They did make the stop at the end of the game. But here we are. I think these three teams are something to keep your eye on. And I do give the edge to the Seattle Seahawks. I think they find a way. I just think they're the best team. And I think, yeah, it's all about Russell Wilson. And there's nobody I'd rather have it be all about. You know, he is, to me, still right there with Pat Mahomes at the top of the food chain in terms of quarterbacks in the league.
It's so funny that we're talking about the Rams. And you guys remember, obviously, the coaching cycle 2 years ago was all about, do you know Sean McVay? Here we are, 2 years later. The Rams are winning games. It's not because of their offense. It's because of Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey on that defense getting things done. And Jared Goff, as much as I hate to say it, because it's basically a slur, he's a game manager. You know, that's what he is right now. They run the ball. They have a bunch of different running backs that they use. But Jared Goff works off the play action. He's just there to not turn the ball over, get it back to their defense. And, you know, is that good enough to make the playoffs for the Rams? Yes. Is it good enough to make a deep run, go to the Super Bowl? I would say the answer to that is no. This team is not what it was 2 years ago. They're good enough to make the playoffs. I don't know if they're good enough to do a lot more. So Rams are a fascinating case because our perception of them 2 years ago versus our perception now, two completely different things.
Another NFC team, guys, the New Orleans Saints, that to me, very interesting. Okay. Drew Brees is on IR. He's going to be out for 3 weeks now. Well, we didn't know it was going to be 3 weeks, I think, until today. Now, Taysom Hill is going to step in and play quarterback for them. This is stunning to me. You have Jameis Winston, who, to me, is a good quarterback. I'm actually excited about him and really imagined him as the successor to Drew Brees in New Orleans. But there is a bit of a love affair, as Jackson Howell said on NFL Friday. I won't plagiarize him, between Taysom Hill and Sean Payton. Sean Payton really likes to deploy Taysom Hill, and he says, this is my starting quarterback this year. It's a little bit baffling to me, guys.
Yeah, listen, there's if you follow the current slang, there's something called capping. That means when you're lying. And Sean Payton, if I haven't heard a cap in my life, consider this, guys. When the news had leaked, and I believe it was ESPN, Diana Rossini, a few people, Adam Schefter, had reported that Taysom Hill was going to be the starter. Sean McVay goes on a Zoom conference for media availability and adamantly just says no. He says, no, that's not the case. I haven't named a starter. I haven't officially named a starter yet. We know who we want to start, but I haven't officially named it. Like, why, Jimmy, why are we going through the runaround? Don't cap. Just tell us that you want Taysom Hill to start. Just be truthful and say, listen, I didn't like what I saw from Jameis in the second half against the Niners. I don't think he can cut it. We signed Taysom Hill, gave him money for this type of circumstance. If Drew Brees got hurt, we're going to go with Taysom Hill and see what we've got. But Jimmy, I don't understand the runaround. Like, I guess Sean Payton doesn't want to be criticized, so he tried to just shove it under the rug. But again, if you're going to start Taysom Hill, go out there, say you're starting Taysom Hill, and go from there. But just don't cap on us and give us the runaround leading into Sunday's game. It's ridiculous.
Sean Payton needs a Taysom Hill intervention. Like, this is where we are at right now. He is starting a guy on Sunday, today, who has more career tackles than completions. That's where we are right now. Yeah, I'm stunned he didn't start Jameis Winston too. I mean, leading passer in the league a season ago. Yeah, that makes no sense to me. But Beyond that, I don't even know what they're trying to accomplish by this. Like, they didn't start the better quarterback. I mean, yeah, some people are grabbing him in fantasy and starting him at tight end because that's a great loophole. But other than that, like, I don't get what the point of this is. Jameis Winston's out of the building after this year. You need to see what you have with him because that's very important for what you do after Drew Brees probably retires after this year. So I don't get it. I don't get it. By the way, also worth noting, Taysom Hill is, I think, 31 years old, which is kind of a surprising fact. Just figured I should mention that.
That is surprising. I actually didn't know that. It makes it crazy to me because I tend to agree with you. I think Drew Brees at most has another year after this, but I sort of think he's done. But we'll see how it goes. Sean Payton is a better offensive mind than I am, so perhaps he has an idea of how Taysom Hill's going to run this offense. We got about 7 minutes left here, guys. Let's talk about some of the hot games this week, and we'll try to go around and perhaps give a pick or two. Tennessee and Baltimore. This is the game of the week and a good place to start. Baltimore, they're going to have to try to change things up from the last time they saw Tennessee in a big game. That was the playoff game that they fell to the Titans in. And they couldn't really stop a nosebleed on the ground last week. They're going to have to deal with Derrick Henry, and they're going to have their hands full. So I am taking Tennessee in this game. I actually think they're the better team, and I think they found a way to beat Baltimore and Lamar Jackson.
I am going to take Baltimore. Both of these teams are reeling right now. Tennessee had a bad loss on Thursday night against Indianapolis, and Tennessee's lost 3 in a row. Baltimore's not coming in so hot either after the game on Sunday, but I like the Ravens, and I think without having to play in a monsoon, they will go ahead and get that victory over Tennessee.
Yeah, I expect a whole lot of rushing yards on both sides, and Jimmy made it quite clear. I mean, Tennessee's coming in losers of 3 of 4, the Ravens 2 of 3. But I would say this. I think for Baltimore, without that monsoon, I mean, for Lamar Jackson to still be able to pull that off, get the win, I think he's confident right now that this offensive system, I know he's talking about defenders knowing the play, but again, that's going to happen. If you study tape as a defender, you're going to know what the opposing offense is running if you're diligent. So if you're Lamar Jackson, you just have to trust in what the Ravens are doing there on offense. And I think, again, I think the team with the most rushing yards will probably win. I think the Ravens will do enough to bottle Derrick Henry. The Ravens have 3 running backs of their own, Ingram, Dobbins, and Gus Edwards. So I think the Ravens, they have a bad taste in their mouths from that playoff loss, and I think Lamar Jackson will get it done, and they'll win this week against Tennessee.
All right, so you guys are on Baltimore. I'm taking Tennessee. We're 2 out of 3 there. Let me go to Kansas City and Las Vegas because this game really interests me. Obviously, Vegas was able to beat Kansas City the first time around this season, and the prevailing wisdom on this game is that there's no way Kansas City loses twice to Las Vegas. I'm sort of with that. I kind of get that. I don't think Patty Mahomes loses again. I think this game's closer than the spread would have you believe. It's an 8-point spread last time I checked, but I do think Kansas City finds a way to pull this one out in prime time.
I think it's interesting from the standpoint that the Raiders have had a bunch of guys out of practice due to COVID this week. I agree and I disagree with you, Chris. I agree with you that the Chiefs are going to win, but I disagree that it's going to be close. I think it'll be a blowout. I think Mahomes goes into Vegas, gets it done. The Raiders defense decimated by COVID. A lot of those guys are going to play, but they haven't practiced. That's going to hurt. And I think the Chiefs win this one going away.
Yeah, this is another revenge game. I'll keep it short in the iconic word of Charles Barkley. Kansas City's going to win this game. Guarantee. Patrick Mahomes, they're going to run rampant on those guys. It's going to be a blowout, like Jimmy said. Patrick Mahomes continuing to solidify that MVP case after I named him MVP last week.
Can I change my pick now that you dropped?
No, you cannot. No, you picked Russell Wilson. You got to stay there.
You guys are a little more sure than I am on this game. I mean, Oakland. I call it Las Vegas. It was going to happen. It was bound to happen.
You don't seem too sure right now.
Las Vegas, they've been better than I thought they would be. Ever since John Gruden walked in the door, they've surprised me. So I actually think they show up and play a good game here. But we're all on the same page. Kansas City does it, and I believe it's Monday Night Football. Los Angeles Rams, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This will be our final pick of the night. And I think this is a good game tomorrow, guys. Rams, they've impressed me. Another team that surprised me. I didn't know that they were that good. Tampa Bay seems like they're figuring it out with Tom Brady. I am going to take Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is another primetime game. I just think he gets it done. I think he's had a couple hiccups on primetime this year, and I think he gets it straightened out. And I think the Rams are playing a little bit above 6-3. I think Tampa Bay finds a way.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Chris. And it's so interesting. There were so many bad takes after the Bucs got routed by the Saints a couple weeks ago. Tom Brady's 43 years old. He's going to be inconsistent. That's going to happen. I think we'll get the good Tom Brady this week, and I like the Bucs to take care of business.
Yeah, it'll be all about a quick start for the Rams. If Aaron Donald and that defensive line, if they can get at him early, it could be a long night in a close game. But again, I think Tampa Bay, just too many weapons on offense. That defense is steadily one of the best in the league right now. I think they get the job done, and they win at home over the Rams.
Guys, that's our show. We're at 1:58 in the morning. I wish you guys a very happy Thanksgiving. Be safe. Enjoy whatever family time is possible. And it was fun doing it with you guys, as always.
Chris, same to you, of course. And everybody out there, please, please, please stay safe. Yep. Can't say that enough. Just please stay safe. It's dangerous right now.
Yeah, guys. I mean, not being in the studio, I mean, that's where we want to be right now, but we have to do it remotely considering the circumstances. And it's just always a pleasure to be able to just kick back and talk sports with you guys on a weekly basis.
Yep, it keeps us sane to gather on Saturday and continue the tradition of the longest running sports call-in show. This is One-on-One. I want to say a special thanks to our guests, Adam Zagoria and Franklin Ncaa, for Andrew Posadas with the headlines, and Jimmy Sullivan, my co-host. Alex Walls is our producer. Bobby Chaffardini, our sports director. I am Chris Baccia. This is One-on-One, and One-on-One is a production of WFUV Sports. Thanks for joining us, and have a happy Thanksgiving, everyone.